The girl was dying in front of 200 people, and not one of them moved. Ethan Cole wasn't supposed to be there. Just another contract worker fixing broken wiring in a building that didn't know his name. But when Maya Sinclair hit the marble floor, gasping like a fish out of water, he didn't think about protocols or permissions or the fact that men like him didn't touch people like her. He thought about his son. He thought about what happens when nobody acts. And he ran toward the girl while everyone else ran away. What came next would cost him everything, or give him everything. Either way, there was no going back. If you want to see how far Ethan's choice takes him, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The fluorescent lights in the basement mechanical room hummed like angry wasps. Ethan Cole wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his wrist, leaving a smudge of grease across his temple. The junction box in front of him was a mess. 30-year-old wiring wrapped around newer installations like vines choking a fence. Whoever had done the last retrofit hadn't bothered to label anything, and now it was Ethan's problem. Dad would have hated this, he muttered to himself, thinking of his father's meticulous approach to electrical work. Every wire labeled, every connection tested twice. Samuel Cole had been old school in the best way, the kind of tradesman who took pride in work nobody would ever see. Ethan checked his watch. 11:47 a.m. He had 13 minutes before he needed to be upstairs to verify the panel replacement on the 14th floor. The Voss Meridian Tower didn't operate on tradesman time. It operated on executive time, which meant being early was being on time, and being on time was being late. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. Probably another text from Lucas's school about the field trip permission slip he'd forgotten to sign. Again. Being a single father meant living in a permanent state of almost keeping up, where every small victory was followed immediately by something you'd missed. The phone buzzed again. Jesus, Ethan muttered, yanking it out. But it wasn't the school, it was Marcus, his site supervisor. Need you lobby level. Now. Issue with the main lighting circuit. Ethan stared at the message, then at the half-finished junction box. He'd need at least another 20 minutes to do this properly. But Marcus didn't send texts like that unless something was actually wrong. He grabbed his tool bag and headed for the service elevator, leaving the panel open. He'd come back. He always came back. The elevator rose through the building's concrete spine, and Ethan watched the floor numbers tick upward on the small display. Basement. Ground. Mezzanine. The Voss Meridian Tower was one of those buildings that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought geometry was a personality trait, all sharp angles and reflective glass. The kind of place where people paid $12 for coffee and acted like it was reasonable. Ethan had been working here for 3 weeks, part of a 6-month contract to overhaul the building's aging electrical infrastructure. It was good money, better than most of the jobs he'd landed in the past year, but it came with the usual bullshit. Security badges that only worked half the time, supervisors who treated contract workers like furniture, staff who looked through him like he was invisible. The elevator doors opened onto the lobby, and Ethan stepped into a different world. The ground floor of Voss Meridian was designed to intimidate. 30-foot ceilings, white marble floors polished to a mirror shine, abstract sculptures that probably cost more than Ethan's truck. A massive digital display wrapped around 3 walls, cycling through stock tickers and promotional videos for companies Ethan had never heard of. Everything about the space screamed money and power and you don't belong here. Marcus was waiting near the reception desk, a stocky man in his 50s with permanent frown lines and a clipboard that never left his hand. He spotted Ethan and waved him over with the kind of urgency that suggested this problem was about to become Ethan's fault. "What have we got?" Ethan asked, setting his tool bag down. "Main circuit for the east lobby, flickering like a damn disco. Building manager's pissed because some big meeting's happening today, and they don't want it looking like we're running this place on generators." Ethan glanced up at the lights. They looked fine now, but he knew how these things went. Intermittent problems were always the worst. Show up when you're not looking, disappear when you are. "I'll check the distribution panel," Ethan said. "Probably a loose neutral or a failing breaker." "Make it fast," Marcus said, "and don't talk to anyone. Security's twitchy today." Ethan didn't ask why. Security was always twitchy in buildings like this. He hoisted his tool bag and moved toward the service corridor that would take him to the electrical room, weaving through clusters of well-dressed people who didn't notice him. That's when he heard it. Not a sound, exactly. More like the absence of sound. A sudden pocket of silence in the middle of the lobby's ambient noise. Conversations cutting off, footsteps stopping. Ethan had learned to trust that silence. It was the same silence that happened right before someone got hurt on a job site, right before something went wrong. He turned around. A girl was on the floor. She couldn't have been more than 16, maybe 17. Dark hair, school uniform, backpack still on her shoulders. She'd gone down hard. Ethan could see the red mark blooming on her cheekbone where her face had hit the marble. But that wasn't what made him move. It was the way she was breathing, short, shallow gasps. Her chest heaving like she'd just run a marathon, but her lips were turning blue. Her hands clawed at her throat in that universal gesture of "I can't breathe," and her eyes were wide with the kind of panic that meant her body was shutting down. People had formed a loose circle around her, close enough to look concerned, far enough to avoid responsibility. Someone was on their phone, probably calling for help. A woman in a business suit knelt beside the girl, but clearly had no idea what to do. Ethan dropped his tool bag and ran. He didn't think about protocols. Didn't think about whether he was allowed to touch her, whether he was qualified, whether it was his place. He thought about Lucas, 8 years old, and what he'd want someone to do if Lucas was the one on the floor. Ethan shoved through the circle and dropped to his knees beside the girl. Up close, it was worse. Her breathing was barely there now, more like a whistle than actual air movement. Her skin had a grayish tint that meant her oxygen levels were tanking. "Asthma attack," he said, loud enough for anyone listening. "Does she have an inhaler?" The woman in the business suit just stared at him. I don't know." "Check her bag." The girl's hands were still at her throat, her whole body rigid with the effort of trying to breathe. Ethan grabbed her backpack and yanked it off, ignoring the way her arms flopped limply. He dumped the contents onto the marble. Textbooks, pens, a water bottle, crumpled receipts, a phone with a cracked screen. No inhaler. "Shit," Ethan muttered. He looked up at the crowd. "Does anyone have an inhaler? Anyone?" Blank faces. Expensive suits. Nobody moved. The girl's eyes were starting to roll back. Ethan made a decision. He tilted her head back, opening her airway as much as possible. Her breathing didn't improve. He'd seen this before. Not often, but enough to know what it meant. Her airways were too constricted. She needed medication, needed it 5 minutes ago, and if she didn't get it soon, she was going to stop breathing altogether. "Call 911, he shouted at no one in particular. Then to the girl, quieter. Hey, look at me. You're going to be okay. Stay with me." Her eyes found his, terrified, pleading. Ethan looked around, desperate now. The lobby had gone completely silent, except for the girl's failing breaths. 200 people, and nobody knew what to do. Then he saw it. Across the lobby, maybe 40 feet away. A red first aid station mounted on the wall next to the elevators. Buildings like this always had them. Fancy corporate liability insurance translated into fiberglass boxes and regulation supplies. Ethan looked at the girl, looked at the first aid station, did the math. 10 seconds there, 10 seconds back, 20 seconds total. Could she last 20 seconds? Did he have a choice? He stood up and ran. Behind him, someone yelled, Sir, you can't." Ethan ignored them. His boots slapped against the marble, loud in the unnatural quiet. He reached the first aid station and ripped it open, shoving aside bandages and antiseptic wipes and useless bullshit until his hand closed around what he needed. An emergency inhaler. The kind designed for situations exactly like this. He sprinted back, sliding to his knees beside the girl so hard he felt the impact in his kneecaps. Her breathing had deteriorated even more, barely a whisper now, her chest barely moving. "Come on," Ethan said, shaking the inhaler. "Come on, stay with me." He tilted her head back again, brought the inhaler to her lips, and pressed. Once. The medication released in a soft hiss. He waited 3 seconds, pressed again. Her body jerked slightly, some autonomic response to the albuterol hitting her system. "Breathe," Ethan said. "Come on, breathe." For 5 terrible seconds, nothing happened. Then the girl gasped, a real gasp this time, ragged and desperate but real. Air moving, oxygen getting through. Ethan nearly collapsed with relief. There you go, keep breathing, you're okay." The girl's chest rose and fell, still labored but no longer dying. Color started creeping back into her face, the grayish tint fading to pale pink. Her eyes focused on Ethan's face, still panicked, but no longer vacant. "Slow breaths," Ethan said, his voice steady even though his hands were shaking. "Nice and slow. You're okay. Help's coming." As if summoned, he heard sirens in the distance. Someone had actually called 911. The girl kept breathing, each breath a little easier than the last, and Ethan stayed with her, one hand on her shoulder, keeping her grounded. That's when he noticed the man. Tall, maybe 50, in a suit that probably cost more than Ethan's monthly rent. He was standing at the edge of the circle that had formed around them, staring down at Ethan with an expression that wasn't gratitude or relief or anything close to it. It was fury. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" the man said. Ethan blinked. "I'm sorry? Do you have medical training? Are you certified to administer aid?" "She was dying." "That's not what I asked." The man stepped closer, and Ethan saw the badge clipped to his belt. Executive credentials, Daniel Voss, Vice President of Operations. "You violated building security protocols by accessing emergency equipment without authorization. You made physical contact with a minor without guardian consent. I saved her life," Ethan said, his voice flat. Voss's face darkened. "That remains to be seen." Two security guards appeared, flanking Voss like bookends. They were both staring at Ethan now, and he realized with a sinking feeling that this wasn't over. The paramedics arrived a moment later, moving efficiently through the crowd with a stretcher and medical bags. Ethan stepped back, giving them room. They took over immediately, checking vitals, asking questions the girl couldn't answer yet, loading her onto the stretcher with practiced ease. One of the paramedics glanced at Ethan. "You administer the inhaler?" "Yeah." "Good call. She was in bad shape." The validation should have felt good. It didn't, because Voss was still standing there, and the security guards hadn't moved. "Sir," one of them said to Ethan, "we're going to need you to come with us." Ethan stared at him. "You're kidding." Building policy. Any incident involving emergency medical response requires a full security review. "A security review," Ethan repeated. "I just saved that girl's life, and you want to do a security review?" "Sir, please don't make this difficult." Ethan looked at the girl being wheeled away, still conscious, still breathing. Then he looked at Marcus, who was standing off to the side with an expression that said, "I told you not to talk to anyone." "Fine," Ethan said. "Let's get this over with." The security office was on the second floor, accessible only by a keycard elevator that took them past the lobby and into the building's administrative core. Ethan had never been up here before. Contract workers didn't get access to anything above the mechanical spaces. Everything was gray and white and aggressively corporate, all straight lines and frosted glass. They put him in a conference room with no windows and told him to wait. Ethan sat in one of the ergonomic chairs and tried not to think about the junction box he'd left open in the basement, or the fact that Lucas got out of school in 4 hours and Ethan had promised to pick him up on time for once. He checked his phone. No signal. The building probably had some kind of interference shielding up here, another layer of security to keep the important people safe from the outside world. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Finally, the door opened. Daniel Voss walked in, followed by a woman Ethan didn't recognize, mid-40s, sharp suit, the kind of neutral expression that suggested she'd been through this exact scenario 100 times before. She was carrying a tablet. "Mr. Cole," she said, not offering her hand. "I'm Patricia Nguyen, head of legal and compliance for Voss Meridian. I need to ask you some questions about the incident in the lobby." "Incident," Ethan said. "That's what we're calling it?" Nguyen sat down across from him, Voss taking the chair beside her. "Can you walk me through exactly what happened, from your perspective?" Ethan did. He kept it factual, no editorializing, just the sequence of events. Girl collapses. He responds. Administers inhaler. Paramedics arrive. The whole thing took maybe 3 minutes from start to finish. Nguyen typed notes on her tablet the entire time, her face unreadable. When Ethan finished, she looked up. "And you accessed the emergency medical supplies without authorization from building management or security personnel?" There wasn't time to ask permission. "Do you have medical training, EMT certification, first aid credentials?" "No, but I know what an asthma attack looks like, and I know how to use an inhaler." "That's not the same as being qualified to administer emergency medical aid." Ethan leaned forward. So what was I supposed to do? Let her die while I filled out a form? Voss spoke for the first time since entering the room. You were supposed to wait for qualified medical personnel. We have protocols for situations like this. Your protocols would have killed her. That's speculation. It's fact, Ethan shot back. She had maybe a minute left before her airways closed completely. The paramedics didn't get there for another 5. Do the math. Wayne held up a hand. Mr. Cole, I understand you believe you acted in good faith, but from a liability standpoint, what you did exposes this company to significant risk. If something had gone wrong, if you'd made her condition worse or caused additional injury, Voss Meridian could be held responsible. But I didn't make it worse. I saved her. That's not the point. Ethan stared at her, something cold settling in his chest. Then what is the point? Wynne exchanged a glance with Voss. We're going to need to review the security footage before making any decisions about next steps. In the meantime, your site access is suspended pending the outcome of this investigation. Suspended, Ethan said. You're suspending me for saving someone's life. We're suspending you for violating building security protocols, Voss corrected. There's a difference. Ethan stood up. Is there? Nobody answered. No. They escorted him out through a side exit like he was some kind of criminal. Marcus met him in the loading area, looking equal parts pissed and sympathetic. They're really doing this? Marcus asked. Yeah. That's bullshit, man. You did the right thing. Apparently that doesn't matter. Marcus sighed, rubbing his face. Look, I'll talk to the union rep, see if we can file a grievance or something. But you know how these corporate places are. They'd rather protect their asses than admit someone did something good. Ethan nodded. He wasn't even angry anymore, just tired. Tired of fighting, tired of being invisible, tired of living in a world where doing the right thing got you punished instead of thanked. He drove home in his truck, an old Ford Ranger with 200,000 miles and a check engine light that had been on for so long he'd stopped noticing it. The city scrolled past his windows, traffic, billboards, people living their lives without any idea that a girl almost died today and nobody cared. Lucas was at aftercare when Ethan got there, playing basketball with 2 other kids in the small gymnasium. He saw Ethan and immediately broke into a run, crashing into him with the full-body enthusiasm of an 8-year-old who hadn't seen his dad in 8 hours. Dad, you're early! Yeah, buddy. Finished up early today. Can we get pizza? Ethan thought about his bank account, about the suspended paycheck that wasn't coming now, about the bills due next week. Sure. Why not? They went to the place down the street, the one with the torn vinyl booths and the jukebox that only played songs from the 80s. Lucas ordered pepperoni and told Ethan about his day, something about a science project involving volcanoes, and how his friend Tyler said girls couldn't be scientists, but Miss Roberts said that was dumb because Marie Curie existed. Ethan listened, made the appropriate responses, and tried not to think about the fact that he might have just lost the best-paying job he'd had in a year because he'd saved someone's life. When they got home, Lucas went straight to his room to work on homework, and Ethan collapsed on the couch. Their apartment was small. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in, a living room that doubled as Ethan's office. The furniture was all second-hand, scavenged from Craigslist and yard sales, but it was theirs. Ethan had made it a home, as best he could, in the 3 years since Emma died. His phone buzzed. Marcus. Union rep says they can't do much. Companies within rights to suspend pending investigation. Sorry, man. Ethan stared at the message until the screen went dark. Mug. 3 days passed. Ethan spent them fixing things around the apartment, leaky faucet in the bathroom, loose hinge on Lucas's bedroom door, the outlet in the kitchen that sometimes sparked. Busy work. The kind of thing that kept his hands occupied and his mind empty. On the 4th day, his phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Mr. Cole? This is Patricia Nguyen from Voss Meridian. We've completed our review of the incident. I'd like to invite you to come in and discuss our findings. Ethan's stomach tightened. When? Tomorrow, if possible. 10 a.m. I'll be there. He hung up and sat there for a long time, staring at nothing. Ciao. The security guard at the front desk barely looked at him when he signed in. They gave him a visitor badge, not his old contractor credentials, but the kind they gave to people who didn't belong, and directed him to the elevator. Patricia Nguyen was waiting in the same conference room, but this time she wasn't alone. Beside her sat a man Ethan didn't recognize, Early 60s, silver hair, expensive suit that made Voss's look cheap. He had the kind of presence that said, "I own this room," and when he looked at Ethan, his gaze was sharp and assessing. "Mr. Cole," Nguyen said, "thank you for coming. This is Richard Sinclair." The name meant nothing to Ethan. "Okay." Sinclair stood and offered his hand. His grip was firm, controlled. "My daughter is alive because of you." The words took a second to land. "Your daughter, the girl from the lobby." "Maya." "Yes." Sinclair sat back down, and Ethan noticed for the first time that the man's eyes were tired, ringed with the kind of shadows that came from not sleeping. "The doctors told me she had less than a minute before her airways would have closed completely. If you hadn't acted when you did," he didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. Ethan sat down slowly. "How is she?" "Home. Resting. She wants to thank you herself, but I told her to wait until she's fully recovered." Sinclair leaned forward. "Mr. Cole, I've spent the past 4 days reviewing what happened in that lobby. I've watched the security footage. I've spoken to witnesses. I've consulted with the paramedics who treated Maya." "Okay," Ethan said, wary now. "Everyone froze," Sinclair said. 200 people in that lobby, including trained security personnel, medical staff from the clinic on the 7th floor, executives with 6-figure salaries and expense accounts, and not one of them moved. Ethan didn't know what to say to that. "Except you," Sinclair continued, "a contract electrician who had no reason to get involved, no obligation to risk anything. You didn't hesitate. You didn't calculate the liability or worry about the rules. You saw my daughter dying and you ran toward her." Nguyen cleared her throat. "Mr. Sinclair has requested that we revisit our initial findings regarding the incident." "Requested," Sinclair said, his tone dry, "is a polite way of saying I made it very clear that if Voss Meridian punished the man who saved my daughter's life, I would withdraw every dollar of investment I have in this building and make sure everyone in the business community knows why." Ethan blinked. "You're an investor?" "Majority shareholder, actually." Sinclair's smile was thin. "Turns out that matters to people like Daniel Voss." Nguyen looked uncomfortable. "After reviewing all the evidence, we've concluded that Mr. Cole's actions, while unorthodox, were justified under the circumstances. The suspension is being lifted, effective immediately." "And?" Sinclair prompted. Nguyen's jaw tightened. "And we'd like to offer Mr. Cole a position within Voss Meridian's operations team, head of emergency response and safety protocols. Full benefits, salary commensurate with the role." Ethan stared at her, then at Sinclair, then back at Nguyen. "You're offering me a job?" "We're offering you the opportunity to make sure what happened in that lobby never happens again," Sinclair said. "To build a system where people don't freeze, where protocols serve people instead of the other way around." He paused. "My daughter is alive because one man decided to act instead of waiting for permission. I'd like to see that become the standard, not the exception." Ethan's mind was racing. A real job. Salary, benefits, stability. The kind of thing he hadn't had since before Emma got sick. But he thought about Voss's face in the lobby, about being escorted out like a criminal, about the way Nguyen had said liability like it was the only thing that mattered. "I need to think about it," Ethan said. Sinclair nodded. "Fair enough. Take the time you need." He stood, and Ethan did the same. "But Mr. Cole, my daughter asked me to tell you something." "What's that?" "She said you told her she was going to be okay, even when she thought she was dying. She said you meant it." Sinclair's voice roughened slightly. "Thank you for that. For seeing her as a person, not a problem." He left the conference room and Ethan watched him go. Nguyen stood as well, gathering her tablet. "I'll have HR send over the formal offer details. You can take up to a week to decide." "Why are you really doing this?" Ethan asked. She paused at the door. "Because Richard Sinclair asked us to." "That's not what I'm asking." Nguyen looked at him for a long moment. "Because he's right," she said finally. "Everyone froze, myself included. I was 20 feet away when Maya collapsed, and I didn't move. I told myself someone else would handle it, someone more qualified. And then I watched a man with grease on his hands and no credentials do what none of us had the courage to do." She met his eyes. "That shouldn't be exceptional. It should be expected. Maybe you can help us figure out how." She left. Ethan stood alone in the conference room, surrounded by glass and steel and corporate emptiness, and tried to figure out what the hell had just happened to his life. He picked up Lucas from school that afternoon and took him to the park, the one with the good swings and the climbing structure shaped like a pirate ship. Lucas talked the whole way there, something about a book report and how he'd picked a story about a kid who built a rocket ship out of cardboard. "That's cool, buddy," Ethan said, only half listening. They got to the park and Lucas ran straight for the swings. Ethan pushed him, higher and higher, until Lucas was shrieking with laughter and demanding to go even higher. "Dad, higher!" And Ethan thought about Maya Sinclair, gasping on that marble floor, thought about the circle of people who'd watched her die, thought about what kind of world it was where saving someone's life made you a liability. "Dad?" Lucas called from the swing. "You okay?" Ethan caught the swing on its backswing, bringing Lucas to a gentle stop. "Yeah, I'm okay." "You look weird." "Just thinking." "About what?" Ethan looked at his son, 8 years old, gap-toothed, fearless in the way kids are when they trust the world to catch them. He thought about the job offer, about stability, about showing Lucas that doing the right thing could actually lead somewhere good. About doing something different, Ethan said, something that matters. Lucas considered this. "Does it pay better than the electric stuff?" Ethan laughed, rough and surprised. "Yeah, it might." "Cool. Can we get ice cream?" "Sure, buddy. Why not?" They walked to the ice cream place on the corner and Ethan let Lucas order whatever he wanted, 2 scoops, chocolate, and cookie dough, in a waffle cone. They sat on the bench outside and watched people pass by, and Ethan made his decision. Not because Richard Sinclair had threatened to pull his money, not because Nguyen had offered him a better paycheck, but because somewhere in this city there was a 16-year-old girl who was alive to see tomorrow, because one person had decided that doing the right thing was more important than following the rules. And if Ethan could make that the standard instead of the exception, maybe that was worth trying. He pulled out his phone and typed a message to Nguyen. "I'll take the job." He hit send before he could second-guess himself. Lucas finished his ice cream and wiped chocolate from his face with the back of his hand. "Dad?" "Yeah?" "That girl you helped, the one at your work, is she okay?" Ethan looked at his son, at the trust and concern in those 8-year-old eyes, and felt something settle in his chest. "Yeah," he said. "She's okay." "Good." Lucas hopped off the bench. "Can we go to the climbing thing now?" "Sure." They went back to the pirate ship, and Lucas climbed to the top while Ethan watched from below, ready to catch him if he fell. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and somewhere in the city behind them, the Voss Meridian Tower reflected the light like a promise or a warning. Ethan wasn't sure which, but he'd find out. Ethan's first day in the new role started at 7:30 in the morning, which meant Lucas had to be at before care by 7, which meant Ethan had been up since 5:45 trying to find Lucas's other shoe while simultaneously making breakfast and signing the permission slip he'd forgotten about for the 3rd time that week. "It's under the couch," Lucas called from the bathroom, toothbrush hanging out of his mouth. Ethan dropped to his knees and looked. Sure enough, there was the shoe, wedged between a dust bunny the size of a tennis ball and a toy car he'd thought was lost forever. "How did you even—" Ethan started, then stopped. There was no point asking. Kids operated on a logic that defied physics. They made it to the school with 4 minutes to spare. Lucas hugged him goodbye at the door, then stopped and looked up at Ethan with that serious expression he got sometimes, the one that made him look older than 8. "You nervous?" Lucas asked. "Maybe a little." "You'll be good at it. You're good at helping people." Ethan felt something tighten in his throat. "Thanks, buddy." "Can we have spaghetti tonight?" "Yeah, we can have spaghetti." Lucas grinned and disappeared into the building, backpack bouncing against his shoulders. Ethan watched him go, then got back in the truck and drove toward a future he still wasn't sure he understood. The Voss Meridian Tower looked different in the early morning light. Less intimidating, more tired. The night cleaning crews were just finishing up, pushing industrial buffers across the marble floors, and the lobby was almost empty except for a handful of early arrivals clutching coffee cups like lifelines. Ethan checked in at the security desk. The guard, a different one from before, younger, with a name tag that read Hayes, looked at his new employee badge and then at Ethan's face. You're the guy, Hayes said. What guy? The one who saved that girl. Everyone's been talking about it. Hayes grinned. Man, Voss was pissed. I heard he spent like 2 hours arguing with Mr. Sinclair about protocols and liability and all that corporate bullshit. Ethan shifted his weight. Yeah, well, here I am. 10th floor, HR is expecting you. The elevator took him up through the building's core, and Ethan watched the numbers climb while trying to remember the last time he'd worn actual dress pants. Probably Emma's funeral. He'd paired them with one of his 2 decent button-down shirts, and the boots he usually saved for job interviews, which meant he looked like exactly what he was, a tradesman playing dress-up in a world that ran on different rules. The 10th floor was all open-concept workspace and glass-walled conference rooms, the kind of design that was supposed to promote collaboration, but mostly just meant everyone could watch you work. A woman in her 30s met him at the elevator, hand extended. Mr. Cole? I'm Jennifer Park, HR. Welcome to Voss Meridian. Her handshake was professional, her smile practiced. She led him through a maze of cubicles and standing desks to a corner office that was significantly smaller than he'd expected. It had a window, at least. 10th floor meant he could see part of the city skyline, the buildings stacked against each other like dominoes waiting to fall. This is your space, Jennifer said. Your login credentials are on the desk, along with your employee handbook and benefits enrollment forms. You'll meet with Patricia Nguyen at 9 to go over your responsibilities, and then you have a building tour at 10:30. Ethan looked around. Desk, computer, filing cabinet, 2 guest chairs. It felt sterile, like a doctor's office. There's coffee in the break room, Jennifer continued. And if you need anything, just dial extension 4422. That's my direct line. Thanks. She left him alone, and Ethan sat down in the office chair, some ergonomic thing that probably cost more than his couch, and stared at the computer screen. His reflection looked back at him from the black monitor, distorted and uncertain. He logged in using the credentials on the sticky note Jennifer had left. The desktop loaded, corporate wallpaper, and a dozen program icons he didn't recognize. His email inbox was already full. Welcome messages, IT support tickets, calendar invites for meetings he didn't understand. One email stood out. The sender was listed as R. Sinclair, subject line blank. Ethan opened it. Mr. Cole, I wanted to reach out personally before your first day. What you're walking into won't be easy. There will be resistance from people who prefer systems over people, who think liability matters more than doing what's right. Don't let them wear you down. Maya is alive because you didn't ask permission to care. That's what we need here. Richard Sinclair. Ethan read it twice, then closed the email and tried to figure out what the hell he was supposed to do for the next hour and 15 minutes until his meeting with Nguyen. He ended up reading through the employee handbook, which was 73 pages of dense corporate speak about conduct policies and harassment training and the proper procedure for requesting time off. There was an entire section on emergency protocols, what to do in case of fire, active shooter, medical emergency, bomb threat, and Ethan found himself getting angrier with every paragraph. The medical emergency protocol was 4 pages long. It included 17 steps, 6 of which involved waiting for authorization from management before taking action. Step 12 said, in bold, do not administer aid unless you have current medical certification and written permission from building management. He was still staring at it when Patricia Nguyen knocked on his doorframe. Mr. Cole, ready to get started? Ethan held up the handbook, this section on medical emergencies. You know it's insane, right? Nguyen's expression didn't change. It's designed to protect the company from liability. It's designed to let people die while everyone fills out paperwork. That's one perspective. It's the right perspective. Nguyen stepped into the office and closed the door behind her. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, more careful. Mr. Cole, I'm going to be direct with you. The only reason you're sitting in this office is because Richard Sinclair has enough leverage to force certain decisions. But leverage doesn't change culture. Most of the senior leadership team views you as a liability, someone who violated protocols and got rewarded for it because a billionaire said so. Sounds about right. Which means you're going to have to prove them wrong, not with speeches or arguments, but with results. She sat down in one of the guest chairs. Your job is to redesign our emergency response systems in a way that prioritizes rapid intervention while still managing risk. You'll report directly to me, and you'll have access to building security, facilities management, and our corporate safety consultants. But make no mistake, people will be looking for reasons to discredit you. Ethan leaned back in his chair. Why are you telling me this? Because I was in that lobby too. I watched Maya Sinclair collapse, and I told myself someone else would handle it. Then I watched you run toward her without hesitating, and I realized I'd spent 15 years in corporate America learning how to avoid responsibility instead of how to take it. Nguyen's jaw tightened. I don't like that person. So if you're actually going to change something here, I'd rather help than get in your way. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to him since he'd walked into this building. Okay, Ethan said. Where do we start? Nguyen pulled out her tablet. Building audit. I want you to walk every floor, identify every potential hazard, every gap in our current protocols. Talk to security, maintenance, janitorial staff, people who actually see how this building operates day to day, not the managers who think they know. That'll take weeks. You have 6. After that, you'll present your findings and recommendations to the executive leadership team. They'll decide whether to implement your changes or bury them. Ethan thought about the junction box he'd left open 3 weeks ago, the half-finished work that had been his entire world before Maya Sinclair stopped breathing. This felt bigger, more complicated, more likely to fail. 6 weeks, he said. Got it. The building tour started on the ground floor and worked its way up. Jennifer Park led the way, pointing out conference rooms and executive suites and amenities like the coffee bar on the 3rd floor and the fitness center on the 15th. Ethan paid attention to different things: fire exits blocked by furniture, first aid stations mounted too high for most people to reach, security cameras with blind spots. On the 7th floor, they passed a medical clinic, the one Sinclair had mentioned, staffed during business hours with a nurse practitioner and basic diagnostic equipment. Ethan stopped. This was open when Maya collapsed? He asked. Jennifer checked her tablet. According to the logs, yes. The NP was with another patient at the time. How far from the lobby? Maybe 200 feet. Why? Ethan did the math. 200 feet, standard walking speed, call it 30 seconds. Add another 30 to assess the situation, another minute to retrieve medication. 2 minutes total, best case scenario. Maya would have been brain dead. Just wondering, he said. They continued the tour. By the time they reached the 20th floor, executive suites, corner offices with city views, conference rooms named after philosophical concepts, Ethan had counted 43 safety violations, most of them small but cumulative. Extension cords daisy-chained together, emergency exits that required badge access, fire extinguishers that probably hadn't been inspected in years. Daniel Voss's office was on the 21st floor. They didn't go inside, but Ethan saw him through the glass wall on a phone call, gesturing with the kind of aggressive precision that suggested whoever was on the other end was getting their ass kicked. That's Mr. Voss, Jennifer said, unnecessarily. Vice President of Operations. He oversees building management, security, and facilities. So he's my boss's boss. Technically, you report to Patricia, who reports to Mr. Voss, who reports to the executive board. But Mr. Sinclair has a seat on that board, so the hierarchy gets complicated. Politics, Ethan said. Welcome to corporate America. They finished the tour back on the 10th floor. Jennifer gave him her phone number. In case you have questions, though, honestly, most people just figure it out as they go, and left him in his office with a stack of access request forms and a building directory that was 300 pages long. Ethan spent the afternoon filling out paperwork and trying to understand the organizational structure. Voss Meridian owned the building but leased space to about 40 different companies, which meant coordinating emergency procedures across multiple tenants, each with their own policies and insurance requirements. It was a bureaucratic nightmare. At 4:30, his desk phone rang. Ethan stared at it for a second. He hadn't used a desk phone in over a decade, then picked up. Cole? Mr. Cole, this is Franklin Hayes from Lobby Security. There's a visitor here to see you, Miss Maya Sinclair. Ethan's heart did something complicated. Send her up. He met her at the elevator. She looked better than the last time he'd seen her. Color in her face, breathing easy, no panic in her eyes. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, and she was holding a coffee cup from the expensive place on the corner. Hi, she said. Hi. They stood there awkwardly for a second. Maya offered the coffee cup. I wasn't sure if you liked coffee, but my dad said everyone in an office drinks coffee, so. Ethan took it. Thanks. It's a latte with an extra shot. The barista said that's what most people get when they're stressed. Smart barista. Maya smiled, just a little. Can we talk? Ethan led her to his office. She sat in one of the guest chairs and looked around, taking in the blank walls and the generic furniture and the handbook still open on his desk. This is weird, she said. What is? You being here, in an office. My dad told me they gave you a job, but I didn't really believe it until I saw it. She paused. You don't look like you belong here. I don't. Good. The people who belong here are the ones who watched me die and didn't do anything. The bitterness in her voice surprised him. Ethan sat down across from her. How are you feeling? Physically? Fine. The doctor said I was lucky. Another minute and I would have had brain damage or worse. She twisted the hem of her sweater. But everyone keeps asking me that, how I'm feeling, if I'm okay, and I keep saying yes because that's what you're supposed to say. But honestly, I'm pissed. At me? No. At everyone else. Maya looked up, and her eyes were fierce. 200 people, Mr. Cole. My school had an assembly about what happened, and they made it sound like some kind of miracle, like the universe just happened to put the right person in the right place at the right time. But that's bullshit. You were there because you were working. Everyone else was there because they work in that building, or visit that building, or have meetings in that building. And not one of them helped me. Ethan didn't know what to say to that. My own math tutor was 10 feet away, Maya continued. She comes to the building every Monday to meet with me before school. She saw me collapse, and she just stood there. Later, she told my dad she didn't want to make things worse, didn't want to do the wrong thing, like doing nothing isn't also a choice. People freeze, Ethan said. It's a natural response to crisis. That's what everyone keeps saying, but you didn't freeze. I got lucky. I've seen asthma attacks before. I knew what to look for. That's not luck, that's knowledge, and you used it. Maya leaned forward. Do you know what the scariest part was? Not the fact that I couldn't breathe. That was terrifying, but it was also kind of abstract, like my body was doing something I couldn't control. The scariest part was looking at all those people and realizing nobody was going to help me, that I was going to die surrounded by strangers who were too afraid or too polite, or too worried about getting in trouble to do anything. Ethan thought about the circle of faces in the lobby, the blank expressions, the phones held up to record but not to call for help. And then you showed up, Maya said, her voice quieter now. And you looked at me like I mattered, like I was a person, not a problem. You told me I was going to be okay, and I believed you. I'm glad it worked out. That's it? That's all you're going to say? Ethan set down the coffee cup. What do you want me to say? I don't know. Maybe that you're angry too. That you think it's messed up that you got in trouble for saving my life. That you're going to make sure it doesn't happen to someone else. I'm working on that last part. Are you? Maya gestured at the office, at the computer and the handbook and the corporate emptiness. Or are you just going to become another person in a building full of people who know how to follow rules but not how to care? The accusation stung because part of Ethan wondered the same thing. He'd spent 3 weeks doing electrical work, hands dirty, problems concrete. Now he was in an office doing paperwork and navigating politics, and he had no idea if anything he did would actually matter. I don't know yet, Ethan said honestly. I'm trying to figure that out. Maya studied him for a long moment, then she stood up. My dad thinks you're going to change things here. He talks about you like you're some kind of hero. But I don't need a hero. I just need people to give a shit when someone's dying in front of them. She left before Ethan could respond. He sat alone in his office, surrounded by forms and policies and the weight of expectations he didn't ask for, and tried to figure out what the hell he'd gotten himself into. At 6 o'clock, he packed up his things and headed home. Lucas was with Mrs. Chen, the neighbor who watched him 3 afternoons a week, in exchange for Ethan fixing things around her apartment. When Ethan picked him up, she handed over a plate covered in foil. Leftovers, she said. Pork dumplings. Lucas helped make them. I folded 17, Lucas announced proudly. Thanks, Mrs. Chen. How was the new job? Complicated. She nodded knowingly. Office jobs always are. Too many people talking, not enough people doing. They went home and ate the dumplings while Lucas talked about his day. something involving a frog in science class, and a disagreement with Tyler about whether Batman could beat Superman in a fight. Ethan listened and made the appropriate responses, grateful for the distraction. After Lucas went to bed, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and started building a spreadsheet. 43 safety violations across 21 floors. He listed them all, categorized by severity and location, noting which ones were quick fixes and which would require budget approval. Then he started researching emergency response protocols at other corporate buildings. What he found didn't make him feel better. Most companies had the same approach: minimize liability, maximize legal protection, assume that trained professionals would always be available within a reasonable time frame. None of them accounted for the human factor: the freezing, the hesitation, the fear of getting it wrong. Ethan closed the laptop and stared at the wall. Emma's photograph was still there, the one from their wedding day, both of them young and stupid and convinced they had time. She'd died 3 years ago, pancreatic cancer, 6 months from diagnosis to funeral. Toward the end, when the pain got bad, she'd made Ethan promise 2 things: take care of Lucas, and don't stop being the kind of person who helps. "I'm trying," Ethan said to the photograph. "I just don't know if I'm doing it right." The photograph didn't answer. It never did. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "This is Patricia Nguyen. Security flagged unusual access patterns on your employee account. Building schematics, safety inspection records, past incident reports. Wanted to make sure it was actually you and not a security breach." Ethan typed back, "It's me. Doing homework." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. "Good. Keep doing it." "And Cole? Don't let Maya Sinclair's anger derail you. She's right to be angry. Use that." Ethan stared at the message, then set his phone down and went back to his laptop. He worked until midnight, building a database of every emergency scenario he could think of and how the current Voss Meridian protocols would handle it. Medical emergency. Fire. Active shooter. Elevator malfunction. Chemical spill. Heart attack, stroke, seizure. Allergic reaction. In almost every case, the protocol prioritized procedure over speed. Wait for authorization. Confirm credentials. Document everything. Minimize liability. And in almost every case, those delays would kill people. Ethan saved the file and closed the laptop. Tomorrow he'd start talking to the people who actually worked in the building: security guards and maintenance crews and administrative assistants. The ones who saw the problems but didn't have the authority to fix them. 6 weeks to audit a building and redesign a system that had been built over decades. 6 weeks to convince people that caring about each other was more important than covering your ass. It felt impossible. But then again, so had saving Maya Sinclair, right up until he'd done it. Ethan turned off the lights and went to bed. In the next room, Lucas was snoring softly, lost in whatever dreams 8-year-olds had. Ethan listened to the sound and thought about all the ways the world could go wrong and all the small choices that kept it from falling apart completely. Then he closed his eyes and tried to sleep, knowing tomorrow would bring more questions he didn't have answers to, more problems he didn't know how to solve. But at least he'd be trying. That had to count for something. The morning of his second week, Ethan showed up at the building at 6:15, before most of the staff arrived, and found Franklin Hayes in the security office drinking terrible coffee from a styrofoam cup. "You're early," Hayes said, not looking up from the monitor displaying 24 camera feeds. "Need to talk to you about something." Hayes glanced at him now, eyebrows raised. "About what?" "The day Maya Sinclair collapsed. You were on duty, right?" Hayes's expression shifted, became guarded. "Yeah, why?" Ethan pulled out a folding chair and sat down. "I'm not here to blame anyone. I just need to understand what happened from your perspective, the security perspective." "My perspective is I was watching the north entrance when the call came in. By the time I got to the lobby, you were already administering the inhaler. How long did it take you to get there?" Hayes frowned. "Maybe 45 seconds. Lobby's on the other side of the building from the north entrance." "And what did you do when you arrived?" "Called it in, made sure the paramedics had clear access, kept the crowd back." Hayes set down his coffee cup. "Look, if you're trying to make me feel like shit for not being faster, I'm not. I'm trying to figure out how the system failed." "Because it did fail, Hayes. A girl almost died, and the people whose job is to respond to emergencies weren't in position to respond." Hayes stared at him for a long moment. Then he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. You want to know why the system failed? I'll tell you. We've got 2 security officers on lobby duty during business hours. 2. For a building that holds 4,000 people, our job is to check badges, watch for threats, and call 911 if something goes wrong. We're not trained for medical emergencies. Hell, most of us aren't even certified in CPR anymore. The company cut that training 3 years ago to save money. They cut medical training? Said it was redundant. Building has a clinic on 7, we've got first aid kits on every floor, and paramedics can get here in under 5 minutes. Why spend money training security when professionals are so close? Hayes' laugh was bitter. Except when someone actually needs help, 5 minutes is forever. Ethan thought about the protocol handbook, the 17 steps, the authorizations and documentation requirements. What would you change? If you could redesign how security handles emergencies? Hayes didn't hesitate. Mandatory medical training for everyone on staff. Not just CPR, actual emergency response. How to recognize the difference between a panic attack and a heart attack. How to use an AED. How to stop bleeding. And I'd put first aid stations at ground level, not 8 feet up where half the building can't reach them. What else? I'd change the culture. Hayes picked up his coffee again, swirled the dregs. Right now, everyone's afraid of liability. Afraid of doing the wrong thing and getting sued or fired. So they do nothing and call it protocol. You want people to actually help each other? You've got to make helping safer than not helping. Ethan pulled out his phone and started typing notes. Would you be willing to help me put together a proposal? Real-world security perspective, not corporate theory. Hayes studied him. You're serious about this? Yeah. Even though half the building thinks you're only here because Sinclair forced the issue? Especially because of that. Hayes grinned, sudden and genuine. All right, I'm in. But you're buying the coffee next time because this shit is undrinkable. Over the next 2 weeks, Ethan talked to everyone he could find. Maintenance workers who knew which stairwells were blocked and which exits stuck. Janitorial staff who saw the building at night when all the polished surfaces revealed their flaws. Administrative assistants who'd witnessed medical emergencies and had no idea what to do besides dial 911 and hope. He talked to Brenda Williams, a facilities manager on the 12th floor, who'd watched a colleague have a seizure during a meeting and spent 15 minutes arguing with building security about whether they were allowed to move her. They kept saying we couldn't touch her without authorization, Brenda told him, anger still fresh in her voice. Like she was a piece of equipment instead of a person. By the time the paramedics arrived, she'd bitten through her tongue and was bleeding all over the conference room carpet. You know what Voss's office sent us afterward? A memo about proper incident reporting procedures. Ethan talked to David Chen, a 30-year-old accountant who'd had a heart attack in the lobby 6 months before Maya's incident. David had survived, barely, because a UPS driver happened to know CPR and started compressions while everyone else stood around filming it on their phones. The worst part wasn't the pain, David said. It was looking up at all those faces and seeing curiosity instead of concern. Like I was entertainment. The UPS guy, I don't even know his name, he kept telling me to hang on, kept talking to me like I was a person instead of a problem. Security tried to pull him off twice because he didn't have building access. Ethan added every story to his database, every failure point, every moment where the system prioritized procedure over people. The pattern was unmistakable. Voss Meridian had built a culture where inaction was rewarded and action was punished, where following rules mattered more than saving lives. On a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks into his audit, Ethan was reviewing incident reports in his office when someone knocked on the doorframe. He looked up expecting Jennifer from HR or maybe Nguyen with another stack of paperwork. It was Daniel Voss. Ethan had been avoiding him, not hard in a building this size, but here he was, filling the doorway in a suit that probably cost what Ethan used to make in a month. His expression was carefully neutral, the kind of blank corporate face that revealed nothing. Mr. Cole, do you have a minute? It wasn't really a question. Ethan closed his laptop. Sure. Voss stepped inside and shut the door. He didn't sit down. I wanted to talk to you about the direction of your audit. Okay. I've been getting reports that you're interviewing staff members about past incidents, creating what amounts to a complaints database about building security and management practices. I'm documenting safety failures so we can fix them. That's one way to frame it. Voss's tone was still neutral, but his eyes were cold. Another way is that you're collecting ammunition to make this company look negligent, talking to people who are understandably emotional about traumatic experiences and recording their grievances as if they're objective facts. Ethan leaned back in his chair. Every person I've talked to has a story about how our current protocols failed them. Those aren't grievances, they're data points. Data points that could be used against us in litigation. Do you understand the liability implications of what you're doing? Do you understand the liability implications of people dying because we're too afraid to help them? Voss's jaw tightened. I understand that you're not a lawyer, Mr. Cole, and you're not a safety consultant or an emergency management professional. You're an electrician who happened to be in the right place at the right time and is now operating under the mistaken impression that one good deed makes you qualified to redesign corporate policy. Is that what you came here to say? I came here to remind you that this company has functioned successfully for 15 years using protocols designed by actual professionals. Protocols that balance safety with legal protection, that account for real-world constraints instead of idealistic fantasies about everyone being a hero. Voss stepped closer to the desk. You may have Richard Sinclair's backing, but he's one board member among 7. And the other 6 are getting very concerned about the liability exposure your little crusade is creating. Ethan stood up. They were roughly the same height, but Voss had the posture of someone used to being obeyed. Ethan had the posture of someone used to not giving a damn. Here's what I understand, Ethan said. A 16-year-old girl almost died in your lobby while 200 people watched. Security protocols prevented trained staff from helping her. Building policies prioritized legal protection over human life. And the only reason she survived is because someone broke your rules. So yeah, I'm documenting every way the system is broken. Because if we don't fix it, someone else is going to die. And when they do, those liability concerns you're so worried about, they're going to look real small compared to the wrongful death lawsuit. Voss stared at him. You're making a mistake. Maybe, but at least I'm trying to fix something instead of protecting it. You think you're different from everyone else in this building. Better, somehow. More moral. Voss's smile was thin. But you're not. You're just new. Give it 6 months and you'll be just like the rest of us. Worried about your paycheck, your benefits, your pension. Following the rules because that's how you keep your job. The system doesn't change, Cole. It changes you. He left before Ethan could respond. Ethan sat back down and stared at the closed door for a long time. Then he opened his laptop and kept working. That evening, he picked up Lucas from Mrs. Chen's and they walked to the corner store for milk and bread and the cereal Lucas liked that was basically candy with vitamins added. On the way home, Lucas was quiet, which was unusual enough that Ethan noticed. You okay, buddy? Lucas shrugged. Tyler said his dad says you're going to get fired. Ethan stopped walking. He said what? Tyler's dad works in your building, in accounting or something. He told Tyler's mom that the guy who saved that girl is causing problems and probably won't last. Lucas looked up at Ethan, worried. Are you going to get fired? Ethan crouched down so they were eye level. I don't know, maybe. Some people don't like the changes I'm trying to make. Why not? Because change is scary. It means admitting you were doing things wrong before. Lucas considered this, but if the old way was wrong, shouldn't they want to fix it? You'd think so. That's dumb. Ethan smiled despite everything. Yeah, it kind of is. They walked the rest of the way home in silence. After dinner, spaghetti, as promised, with the sauce from a jar that Lucas insisted tasted better than the homemade kind. Ethan helped with homework, while his phone buzzed with emails he ignored. At 8:30, he tucked Lucas into bed and read him 2 chapters from the book they were working through, some fantasy thing about kids who found a magic door in their school basement. Dad? Lucas said as Ethan was turning off the light. Yeah. Even if you do get fired, you did the right thing, saving that girl. Something warm and painful twisted in Ethan's chest. Thanks, buddy. And if Tyler's dad says mean stuff again, I'm going to tell him his tie looks stupid. Ethan laughed. Maybe don't do that. Why not? His tie does look stupid. It's got little golf clubs on it. Still, probably not worth starting a fight over. Lucas yawned. Okay. Love you. Love you too. Ethan closed the door and stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to Lucas settle into sleep. Then he went to the kitchen table and opened his laptop. Nguyen had sent him an email an hour ago. Subject line, We need to talk. He opened it. Cole. Voss filed a formal complaint with the board about your audit methodology. Claims you're creating a hostile work environment and exposing the company to unnecessary legal risk. Board meeting is scheduled for Monday. You'll need to present your preliminary findings and defend your approach. I suggest you have something solid. Again, Ethan checked the calendar. Monday was 4 days away. He'd been planning to use the full 6 weeks before presenting anything, but apparently Voss had decided to accelerate the timeline. He pulled up his spreadsheet. 3 weeks of interviews, incident reports, safety violations documented. It was comprehensive, but not finished. The recommendations section was barely started. Rough ideas, nothing concrete enough to present to a board that was looking for reasons to shut him down. Ethan worked until 2 in the morning, organizing data, building graphs, trying to turn 3 weeks of conversations into something that looked like professional analysis instead of a complaint letter. His eyes burned and his back ached from the cheap kitchen chair, and he kept thinking about what Voss had said. The system doesn't change. It changes you. When he finally closed the laptop, he was too wired to sleep. He walked to Lucas's room and stood in the doorway, watching his son breathe in the darkness. 8 years old. Still young enough to believe that doing the right thing mattered, that people in charge would listen to reason, that the world made sense. Ethan wanted to keep that innocence alive as long as possible. But he also knew that the best way to teach Lucas about integrity wasn't through speeches or lessons. It was through example, through making hard choices and standing by them even when it cost something. He went back to the kitchen and made coffee even though it was 2 in the morning, and he opened his laptop again and kept working. Friday passed in a blur of data analysis and presentation building. Ethan skipped lunch, skipped dinner, ran on coffee and adrenaline and the stubborn belief that if he just worked hard enough, made the argument clear enough, someone would listen. Saturday he took Lucas to the park because he'd promised, and he pushed his son on the swings and tried not to think about Monday. But Lucas noticed anyway, the way kids always do. "You're worried about the meeting," Lucas said from the swing. "A little. What happens if they say no?" "Then I probably lose the job. And we go back to how things were before?" Ethan caught the swing, stopped its momentum. "Would that be so bad?" Lucas thought about it. "I liked before. You were home more, but you seem like you care about this job more, even though it makes you stressed." "I do care about it." "Then you should fight for it." Ethan looked at his son, 8 years old, gap-toothed, wearing a superhero t-shirt that was 2 sizes too small because he was growing faster than Ethan could keep up with. When had Lucas gotten so wise? "You're right," Ethan said. "I should." Sunday he rehearsed his presentation 17 times, timing it, adjusting slides, anticipating questions. Nguyen called him at 7 p.m. "You ready for tomorrow?" she asked. "As ready as I'm going to be." "Voss is going to come at you hard. He spent the last week building support among the other board members, framing you as a liability. You need to be prepared for that." "What do you suggest?" "Don't get defensive. Don't make it personal. Stick to the data and make the business case, not the moral one. These are investors, Cole. They care about risk and return. Show them that your changes reduce liability, improve workplace safety ratings, and protect the company from lawsuits. Save the speeches about doing the right thing for after they're already convinced." Ethan thought about the people he'd interviewed. Brenda Williams and David Chen and Maya Sinclair. Their stories weren't data points or business cases. They were lives that had been endangered by a system that valued protection over people. "I'll try," he said. "Trying isn't enough. You need to win them over. Because if you don't, Voss will shut this whole thing down and you'll be out of a job by Tuesday." She hung up before he could respond. Ethan stood in his kitchen holding his phone, listening to Lucas play video games in the other room, and tried to figure out how to turn 3 weeks of human stories into a PowerPoint presentation that would convince 7 investors to care about something besides their bottom line. He stayed up until midnight working on it. Then he went to bed and stared at the ceiling, running through arguments and counter-arguments, until exhaustion finally pulled him under. Monday morning arrived too fast. Ethan dropped Lucas at school, drove to the building, and took the elevator to the 21st floor where the executive boardroom was located. He'd never been up here before. The carpet was thicker, the art on the walls more expensive, the silence more oppressive. Nguyen met him outside the boardroom at 8:45. She was wearing a dark suit and an expression that suggested this was going to be worse than she'd implied on the phone. 7 board members, she said quietly. Voss, Sinclair, and 5 investors who care primarily about quarterly returns. You'll have 30 minutes to present. Then they'll ask questions. Stay calm, stay factual, and for the love of everything, don't lose your temper. I won't. Yes, you will. You get this look when you're angry, like you're about to flip a table. I've seen it twice now. Don't let them see it today. Nguyen? I'm serious, Cole. These people eat conflict for breakfast. If they sense weakness or emotion, they'll use it against you. The boardroom doors opened. A woman in her 60s gestured them inside. The room was designed to intimidate. Massive table, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the entire city. 6 people were already seated. Ethan recognized Voss immediately, sitting at the far end with the satisfied expression of someone who'd already won. Next to him was Richard Sinclair, who gave Ethan a slight nod. The other 5 were strangers, 3 men, 2 women, all wearing variations of the same expensive neutral outfit. Mr. Cole, the woman who'd opened the door said, I'm Margaret Chen, board chair. Please take a seat. Ethan sat. Nguyen took the chair beside him and placed a folder on the table in front of her. Backup materials, probably, though Ethan had no idea what was in it. Margaret looked at him over reading glasses that probably cost more than his truck. Mr. Voss has raised concerns about your audit methodology and the direction of your safety review. Before we address those concerns, we'd like to hear your preliminary findings. You have 30 minutes. Ethan stood up, connected his laptop to the presentation screen, and pulled up his slides. For the next 28 minutes, he walked them through everything he'd found. 43 documented safety violations. 17 incidents in the past 2 years where inadequate emergency response had resulted in injury or near death. Security protocols that prioritize legal protection over rapid intervention. A building culture where fear of liability had created a bystander effect so pervasive that people would literally watch someone die rather than risk doing the wrong thing. He kept his voice steady, stuck to facts, showed graphs and statistics and incident timelines, made the business case exactly the way Nguyen had told him to. Reduced liability exposure, improved safety ratings, better insurance premiums, protection from wrongful death lawsuits. He talked about David Chen, the accountant who'd survived a heart attack because a delivery driver broke protocol to help him. About Brenda Williams' colleague who'd had a seizure while staff argued about authorization. About security guards who weren't trained to handle medical emergencies and first aid stations placed where people couldn't reach them. And finally, he talked about Maya Sinclair, without using her name. A 16-year-old student who'd collapsed in the lobby while 200 people watched and nobody acted, who had lived only because someone violated every protocol in the handbook to save her. The current system failed her, Ethan said, and it's going to fail again unless we change it. Not because people don't care, but because we've built a culture where caring is punished and inaction is rewarded, where following procedure is more important than saving lives. He clicked to his final slide, a simple list of recommended changes. Mandatory emergency response training for all staff. First aid stations at accessible heights. Revised protocols that empowered immediate action. Cultural shift toward shared responsibility instead of delegated expertise. These changes won't eliminate all risk, Ethan said. Nothing can. But they'll create an environment where people feel empowered to help instead of afraid to try, where we measure success by lives saved instead of lawsuits avoided. He sat down. The room was silent. Margaret looked at the other board members, some unspoken communication passing between them. Then she looked at Voss. Daniel, you wanted to respond to these findings? Voss stood up, smooth and confident. I appreciate Mr. Cole's passion, but passion isn't the same as expertise. What he's proposing would expose this company to significant liability. Training non-medical staff to administer emergency aid opens us up to malpractice claims. Empowering immediate action without proper authorization creates chaos. And suggesting that our current protocols are somehow negligent ignores 15 years of successful building management with minimal incident. Minimal incident, Ethan repeated before he could stop himself. A girl almost died 3 weeks ago. One incident, Voss said, which was resolved successfully by emergency medical personnel. Yes, you intervened before they arrived, and yes, your intervention may have helped, but it could just as easily have made things worse. You're not a doctor, Mr. Cole. You're not trained in emergency medicine. You got lucky. I knew what an asthma attack looked like. Based on what qualification? Ethan's hands tightened on the table edge. Nguyen's warning echoed in his head. Don't lose your temper. Based on being a human being who paid attention, Ethan said, which apparently makes me more qualified than everyone else who was in that lobby. One of the investors, a man in his 50s with steel gray hair, leaned forward. Mr. Voss raises valid points about liability. How do you address the risk of untrained personnel causing harm while attempting to help? Ethan took a breath. By training them, that's the whole point. Right now we have untrained personnel who don't help because they're afraid. I'm proposing we train them so they know what to do and feel confident doing it. The liability risk isn't in people trying to help. It's in people dying while we document why nobody helped them. And if someone makes a mistake during that help, another investor asked, if they perform CPR incorrectly and break ribs, or administer medication that causes an allergic reaction. Good Samaritan laws protect people who render aid in emergencies, Nguyen said, speaking for the first time. As long as the intervention is reasonable and made in good faith, the liability exposure is minimal. Minimal isn't zero, Voss countered. Richard Sinclair spoke quietly from his end of the table. My daughter is alive because someone decided that helping her mattered more than covering his ass. I'd rather face a liability lawsuit from a well-intentioned mistake than a wrongful death suit from deliberate inaction. With respect, Richard, Voss said, you're emotionally invested in this situation. That's understandable, but we can't make policy based on emotion. Then make it based on math, Sinclair shot back. How much did we pay in legal fees settling David Chen's near-death incident? How much will we pay the next time someone dies because our protocols prevented intervention? Cole's proposing changes that reduce those risks while improving workplace culture and safety ratings. That's not emotion. That's good business. Margaret held up a hand. Gentlemen, let's keep this civil. She looked at Ethan. Mr. Cole, you've had 3 weeks to conduct this audit. Your findings are preliminary at best. What makes you confident that the recommendations you're proposing will actually work? Ethan thought about Maya's face when she'd come to his office. The anger in her voice when she'd talked about being surrounded by people who wouldn't help. The fear in her eyes when she'd been dying on that marble floor. Because I've talked to the people who work here, Ethan said. Security guards who want to help but aren't trained. Maintenance workers who've seen hazards and had no authority to fix them. Staff members who've witnessed emergencies and felt helpless because they didn't know what to do. Nobody wants to be the person who watches someone die. But our current system makes that the safest choice. Change the system and you change the behavior. Theoretical, Voss said, based on anecdotes and conjecture. Based on 3 weeks of interviews with actual employees. Employees with grievances, complaints, personal vendettas against management. Ethan stood up. Nguyen's hand moved toward his arm. Don't do it. Don't lose control. But he was already talking. You want to know what's theoretical? Ethan said, voice rising. Thinking that following protocol will save lives when the protocol is designed to avoid lawsuits, not prevent deaths. Believing that everything's fine because we haven't been sued yet, not because people are actually safe. Telling yourself that one girl dying in your lobby is an acceptable cost of doing business. I never said, you said it was one incident. Like it doesn't matter. Like she doesn't matter. Ethan's hands were shaking now. But she does matter. David Chen matters. Brenda Williams' colleague matters. Every person who's ever needed help in this building and didn't get it because we were too afraid of liability to act like human beings, they all matter. The room had gone completely silent. You're right that I am not a safety consultant, Ethan continued. I'm just someone who refused to watch a kid die when I could help her. And yeah, maybe that makes me unqualified for this job. Maybe I don't understand corporate culture or legal protection or quarterly returns. But I understand that buildings are full of people, not assets. And people deserve to work in a place where their colleagues won't let them die to protect the company's insurance premiums. He sat down, heart pounding, knowing he'd just destroyed whatever credibility he'd built with the professional presentation. Margaret Chen looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the other board members. I think we've heard enough for today. Thank you, Mr. Cole. We'll deliberate and inform you of our decision. It was a dismissal. Ethan gathered his laptop and followed Nguyen out of the boardroom. Neither of them spoke until they reached the elevator. I told you not to lose your temper, Nguyen said. I know. You just called out the entire board for being complicit in negligent homicide. I know. The elevator doors opened. They stepped inside. "For what it's worth," Nguyen said as the doors closed, "you weren't wrong." They rode down in silence. When Ethan got back to his office, he sat at his desk and stared at the wall and waited for the phone call that would tell him he was fired. It came 2 hours later, but it wasn't the call he expected. "Mr. Cole, this is Margaret Chen. The board has reached a decision regarding your audit and the proposed safety changes." Ethan's stomach dropped. He'd spent the past 2 hours mentally preparing himself for termination, rehearsing how he'd explain it to Lucas, calculating how long their savings would last while he looked for another job. "Okay," he said, "we're approving a 90-day pilot program. You'll implement your recommended changes in phases, starting with mandatory emergency response training for all security and facilities staff. If the program shows measurable improvement in response times and safety metrics without significant increase in liability incidents, we'll expand it building-wide." Ethan blinked. "You're approving it?" "With conditions. Daniel Voss will oversee the budget and timeline. You'll report weekly progress to the board. And if at any point the program creates unmanageable risk exposure, we reserve the right to terminate it immediately." Margaret paused. "Mr. Cole, your presentation was unprofessional, and your conduct in that boardroom was borderline insubordinate. But your data was solid, and your argument, while emotionally delivered, had merit. Don't make us regret this decision." She hung up before he could respond. Ethan sat there holding the phone, trying to process what had just happened. Then he called Nguyen. "They approved it," he said when she picked up. "I know. I was there for the vote, 4-3, with Sinclair breaking the tie." 4-3, Ethan repeated. "That's not exactly a mandate." "No, which means you're going to have to prove them right fast because the 3 who voted against you are waiting for any excuse to shut this down." Nguyen's voice softened slightly. "But you got your shot, Cole. Don't waste it." The next morning, Ethan arrived at 6 a.m. and found Franklin Hayes already in the security office, along with 3 other guards Ethan recognized from the lobby rotation. "Heard the news," Hayes said. "Training starts when?" "Next week if I can get the program designed by then. You available to help?" "Hell yeah, what do you need?" Ethan pulled out his laptop and opened the outline he'd started building the night before. "I need to create a training curriculum that teaches practical emergency response without requiring medical certification. CPR, basic first aid, how to recognize common medical emergencies. Stuff that's simple enough that anyone can learn it, but comprehensive enough that it actually saves lives." One of the other guards, a woman in her 40s named Lisa Park, leaned forward. "My sister's an EMT instructor. She does corporate training sometimes. Want me to reach out?" "Yeah, see if she can consult on curriculum design." They spent the next 2 hours mapping out the basics. Recognition of heart attacks, strokes, seizures, allergic reactions, asthma attacks. Proper use of AEDs and first aid kits. When to intervene and when to wait for professionals. How to keep someone calm while help was coming. "The hard part isn't the physical skills," Hayes said. "It's getting people to overcome the freeze response. That moment when you have to decide whether to act or wait for someone else." "How do you train for that?" Ethan asked. "Repetition? Simulation? Make the response automatic so there's no time to overthink it." Hayes pulled up a video on his phone, some kind of military training exercise where soldiers practiced emergency casualty care under pressure. You drill it until helping becomes the default instead of the exception. Ethan watched the video and thought about Maya on the marble floor, the circle of frozen faces. "We'll need realistic scenarios, not classroom theory. Actual practice with time pressure and people watching." Lisa nodded. "My sister does that. Sets up mannequins in public spaces, creates fake emergencies, times how long it takes people to respond. Says it's the only way to actually change behavior. Can she do that here? I'll ask." Over the next week, Ethan barely slept. He worked with Lisa's sister, Jennifer Park, no relation to the HR Jennifer, to design a 3-day intensive training program. Day 1 covered recognition and assessment. Day 2 focused on intervention techniques. Day 3 was nothing but scenario drills, increasingly chaotic situations designed to force rapid decision-making under stress. Jennifer Park was in her 30s, compact and intense, with the kind of voice that made you pay attention whether you wanted to or not. She showed up to the first planning meeting with a duffel bag full of training mannequins and a presentation that was 50 slides of graphic medical imagery. If you're going to train people to handle emergencies, you can't sugarcoat it, she said, pulling up a photo of someone mid-seizure. They need to see what this actually looks like, not textbook diagrams, real situations where real people are suffering and there's no time for hesitation. Ethan looked at the slides and felt his breakfast threatening to come back up. Is all of this necessary? You want them to freeze when they see someone bleeding, vomiting, turning blue? Then yeah, it's necessary. Exposure builds tolerance. Tolerance enables action. They scheduled the first training session for the following Monday, starting with the 20-person security and facilities team. Ethan sent out a memo explaining the program, mandatory attendance, full pay, certification upon completion. He expected pushback. Instead, he got an email from Hayes within an hour. Everyone's in. Half of them have been wanting this kind of training for years. Company just never wanted to pay for it. On Friday afternoon, Ethan was reviewing the final training materials when his office phone rang. Unknown internal extension. Cole. Mr. Cole, this is Daniel Voss. I need you to come to my office, now. The line went dead before Ethan could respond. Voss's office was everything Ethan expected. Corner suite, city views, furniture that probably cost more than a year of Ethan's old salary. Voss was standing by the window when Ethan arrived, hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the skyline like some movie villain contemplating his evil empire. Close the door, Voss said without turning around. Ethan did. I want to be very clear about something, Voss said. The board may have approved your pilot program, but I'm the one who controls the budget and timeline, which means every decision you make goes through me. Every expense, every schedule change, every modification to the plan. Understood? Understood. Good. Voss turned around, his expression unreadable. I've reviewed your training proposal. It's aggressive. 3 full days of intensive coursework for 20 staff members means 60 days of lost productivity. That's significant. It's necessary. Perhaps, but I'm cutting it to 2 days. Same material, condensed timeline. You'll make it work. Ethan's jaw tightened. 2 days isn't enough time to properly train people for emergency response. Then you'll need to be more efficient. Voss moved to his desk, pulled out a file. I'm also reducing your budget by 30%. The board approved funding, but they didn't specify the amount. I'm allocating what I think is reasonable given the uncertain return on investment. You're sabotaging the program before it even starts. I'm exercising fiscal responsibility. There's a difference. Voss handed him the file. These are the revised parameters. You'll work within them or we'll terminate the pilot and you'll be back to looking for electrical work by the end of the month. Ethan took the file without opening it. Why do you hate this so much? The idea that people might actually help each other. I don't hate it. I just don't think it's realistic. Voss sat down, gestured for Ethan to do the same. Ethan remained standing. You think you're going to change human nature with a training program and some inspirational speeches. But I've been in corporate management for 25 years, and I can tell you exactly what's going to happen. People will take the training because it's mandatory. They'll get their certifications. And then the first time there's an actual emergency, 90% of them will freeze anyway, because theory and practice are completely different animals. Ipati. You don't know that. I do know that. I've seen it happen over and over. You want to know why our current protocols exist? Because they work. They clearly define responsibility, minimize liability, and ensure that trained professionals handle situations they're qualified to handle. Is it perfect? No. But it's better than your fantasy where everyone's a hero. One person being willing to act isn't a fantasy, it's a choice that most people won't make when it matters. Voss stood up. But go ahead. Run your program. Train your people. And when it fails, and it will fail, maybe you'll understand why we do things the way we do. Ethan left the office with the file and a burning anger that made it hard to breathe. He went back to his own office and opened the file. Voss had cut the budget from $40,000 to $28,000, reduced the training from 3 days to 2, eliminated funding for scenario props, and added a requirement for weekly progress reports documenting cost-benefit analysis. It was designed to make the program fail. Ethan knew it. Voss knew it. The question was whether Ethan could make it work anyway. He called Jennifer Park. We've got a problem, he said, and explained the cuts. Jennifer was quiet for a moment. 2 days is tight, but doable if we eliminate some of the theoretical content and focus purely on practical skills. The budget reduction is harder. Quality training equipment isn't cheap. What if we improvise? Use what we've got in the building, supplement with borrowed equipment. Borrowed from where? You know other EMT instructors, right? People who might loan us mannequins and AED trainers for a few weeks? Maybe. But Cole, even if we pull this off with duct tape and favors, it's still going to look makeshift. The board's going to compare it to professional programs that cost twice as much and question whether we're actually providing adequate training. Then we make it better than the professional programs. More realistic, more intensive, so good that nobody can question the results. Jennifer laughed, short and sharp. You're either incredibly optimistic or completely delusional. Probably both. All right, I'll make some calls, but you owe me dinner when this is over. Deal. That weekend, Ethan worked with Jennifer and Hayes to completely redesign the program. They stripped out the lecture components, turned everything into hands-on practice. Jennifer called in favors from half a dozen EMT instructors across the city, borrowing equipment and recruiting volunteer actors to play victims in the scenario drills. By Sunday night, they had something that looked less like a professional corporate training program and more like a boot camp. 2 days, 16 hours total, with breaks only for lunch and bathroom. Participants would rotate through stations: CPR practice, AED deployment, bleeding control, airway management, crisis communication, with the final 4 hours dedicated entirely to realistic scenarios with time pressure and observers. It's going to be brutal, Jennifer warned. Some people are going to hate it. As long as they learn it, Ethan said. Monday morning, 20 security and facilities staff filed into the converted conference room on the second floor that Ethan had claimed for the training. Most looked skeptical. A few looked actively hostile. Hayes stood at the front with Jennifer, both of them radiating the kind of competent intensity that suggested this was going to be a very long 2 days. Welcome, Jennifer said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. For the next 16 hours, we're going to teach you how to save lives. Not in theory, in practice. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to feel uncomfortable. Some of you are going to want to quit. Don't. Because the next time someone collapses in this building, you're going to be the difference between them living and dying. She clicked to the first slide, a photo of a man in full cardiac arrest, face gray, eyes rolled back. This is what a heart attack looks like. Not the Hollywood version where someone clutches their chest and falls over gracefully. The real version, where they're scared and suffering and you have maybe 4 minutes to do something about it. Let's begin. The first day was grueling. Jennifer and Hayes drilled them relentlessly. Positioning, compression depth, breathing technique. Every mistake was corrected immediately, every hesitation called out. By lunch, half the participants looked exhausted. By the end of the day, 2 had dropped out, claiming the training was too intense for what they were being paid to do. Ethan found them in the hallway. We're not asking you to become paramedics, he said. We're asking you to be willing to help when someone needs it. That's it. One of them, a maintenance worker named Carlos, who'd been with the building for 8 years, shook his head. Man, I signed up to fix elevators and change light bulbs, not to do chest compressions on dying people. What if it was your wife, your kid? Would you want someone to help them? That's different. How? Carlos didn't have an answer for that. He walked away. The other dropout followed. 18 remained. Day 2 was worse. Jennifer had recruited actors from a local theater company to play victims in the scenario drills. They were disturbingly good at it, screaming, convulsing, bleeding from makeup wounds that looked real enough to turn stomachs. The training room became a controlled chaos of emergencies, with Jennifer and Hayes shouting instructions and time limits while participants tried to remember their training under pressure. Lisa Park froze during her first scenario, a simulated seizure, and just stood there while the actor thrashed on the floor. Hayes let it go for 30 seconds, then stopped the drill. What happened? He asked. I don't know, Lisa said, shaking. I know what I'm supposed to do. I've practiced it. But when I saw her actually seizing, I just couldn't. Why not? Because what if I do it wrong? What if I hurt her? What if you do nothing and she dies? Lisa stared at him, then at the actor on the floor, then back at Hayes. Run it again. They ran it again. This time Lisa moved, awkward and uncertain but moving. She positioned the actor on her side, cleared the space around her, timed the seizure. It wasn't perfect, but it was action instead of paralysis. By the end of day 2, all 18 participants had passed the scenario drills. They were exhausted, emotionally drained, but they'd done it. Jennifer handed out completion certificates and basic certification cards that would need to be renewed annually. "You're not experts," she told them. "You're barely competent, but you're competent enough to make a difference. Use that." Ethan thanked her after everyone had left. "You made them face the hard parts. That's the only way it works. You can't train people to handle emergencies without showing them what emergencies actually look like." Jennifer packed up her equipment. But Cole, this was the easy group. Their security and facilities, they're already oriented toward crisis response. Wait until you try to train the executive staff. That's when it's going to get interesting. She wasn't wrong. The following week, Ethan scheduled training sessions for administrative staff, starting with the 10th floor where he worked. He sent out the same memo: mandatory attendance, full pay, certification upon completion. The pushback was immediate. A dozen emails within the first hour, all variations of the same complaint. Too time intensive, not part of their job description. They had meetings, deadlines, actual work to do. Ethan forwarded them all to Nguyen with a single question. "Mandatory means mandatory, right?" Her response came back in under a minute. "Yes. Anyone who refuses goes on record as non-compliant with building safety policy. Their choice." Attendance for the first administrative training session. 32 people, most of whom looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Ethan stood at the front of the room and looked at them. Assistants, coordinators, junior analysts, people whose biggest emergency was usually a printer jam. "I know you don't want to be here," he said. "I get it. This feels like a waste of time, like something that's never going to be relevant to your actual job. But 3 weeks ago, a 16-year-old girl almost died in the lobby of this building while 200 people watched. And the reason nobody helped her wasn't because they didn't care. It was because they didn't know what to do, and they were afraid of making it worse." He clicked to a photo, Maya Sinclair's school picture, the one her father had given him permission to use. Her name is Maya. She has a family, friends, a whole life ahead of her. And she's alive because one person decided that helping her was more important than worrying about liability or protocol or what other people would think. That's what this training is about. Not turning you into paramedics, just giving you the confidence to act when someone needs help. The room was silent. A few people looked uncomfortable. One woman in the back was crying quietly. Ethan ran them through the same program Jennifer had designed, condensed even further to fit into a single 8-hour day. It wasn't perfect, but by the end, 32 people knew how to recognize the signs of a heart attack, how to use an AED, how to help someone who was choking or bleeding or having a seizure. More importantly, they'd practiced doing it under pressure, acted instead of frozen, chosen to try instead of assuming someone else would handle it. Over the next month, Ethan trained 400 people: security, facilities, administrative staff, even some of the lower-level executives who couldn't find a way to exempt themselves. He ran the sessions himself when Jennifer wasn't available, learning as he went, adjusting the curriculum based on what worked and what didn't. Voss attended one session, showed up unannounced on a Wednesday afternoon, and sat in the back watching. He didn't participate, didn't ask questions, just watched with that same unreadable expression and left without comment. 2 days later, Ethan got an email from Margaret Chen requesting a progress update for the board. He compiled the data: 400 people trained, 0 liability incidents, measurable improvement in emergency response drill times. He sent it off and waited. The response came a week later. The board was extending the pilot program another 90 days and allocating additional funding to expand training to all building tenants, not just Voss Meridian staff. Ethan read the email 3 times to make sure he understood it correctly. Then he called Nguyen. "They're expanding it," he said. "I know, Sinclair pushed hard, but Voss actually didn't fight it, which surprised everyone." "Why wouldn't he fight it?" "Because the data's working in your favor. No incidents, good metrics, and 3 tenant companies have specifically requested the training for their employees. That's revenue, Cole. Voss cares about revenue." Ethan should have felt relieved, vindicated even. Instead, he just felt tired, because expanding the program meant more training sessions, more scenarios, more hours spent trying to convince people that caring about each other was worth the effort. That night, he picked up Lucas from aftercare and they went to get pizza. Lucas had been quieter than usual lately, spending more time in his room, less interested in the things that used to make him excited. "You okay, buddy?" Ethan asked over pepperoni slices. Lucas shrugged. "I guess." "That's not really an answer." "You're working a lot again. Like before." The words hit harder than they should have. Ethan set down his pizza. "I know. I'm sorry." "You keep saying that, but you keep doing it anyway." "This job is important, Lucas. I'm trying to help people." "You're always trying to help people." Lucas looked up, and there was something in his eyes that looked too old for 8. "But what about helping me? I don't need you to save strangers. I just need you to be home." Ethan didn't know what to say to that, because Lucas was right. The job had consumed him. Early mornings, late nights, weekends spent preparing training materials instead of being present for his son. "I'll do better," Ethan said finally. "You said that last time." "I mean it." Lucas just nodded and went back to his pizza, and Ethan felt the weight of every promise he'd made and broken since Emma died. The next week, Ethan started leaving work at 5 p.m. sharp. No exceptions. He delegated some of the training sessions to Hayes and Jennifer, focused his own hours on program design and oversight instead of hands-on delivery. It meant slower progress, but it also meant picking Lucas up from school twice a week, helping with homework, being present for the small moments that made up a childhood. On a Thursday afternoon, Ethan was working in his office when someone knocked. He looked up expecting Wynn or maybe Hayes with a training update. It was Maya Sinclair. She looked different from the last time he'd seen her, older somehow, more sure of herself. She was wearing a Voss Meridian visitor badge and carrying a folder. "Hi," she said. "Hi, what are you doing here?" "My dad's in a meeting upstairs. I asked if I could come see you." She held up the folder. "I brought you something." Ethan gestured to the guest chair. Maya sat down and opened the folder, pulling out what looked like a school essay. Typed, double-spaced, with a title in bold at the top. "The Cost of Inaction, a Personal Account of Emergency Response Failure." "My English teacher assigned a personal narrative essay," Maya said. "We were supposed to write about a significant experience and what we learned from it. So I wrote about what happened in the lobby, about dying while everyone watched, about you." Ethan took the essay and read the first paragraph. Maya's writing was clear and unflinching, describing in precise detail what it felt like to not be able to breathe, to look at faces and see curiosity instead of concern. "I interviewed some of the people who were there that day," Maya continued. "Asked them why they didn't help. Most of them said the same thing. They didn't know what to do. They were afraid of making it worse. They assumed someone more qualified would handle it. Only one person told me the truth." "What truth?" "That they were more worried about getting in trouble than about me dying." Maya's voice was steady but hard. "She was a junior executive, said she'd been trained by the company to always defer to security in emergency situations, that intervening personally could create liability issues. She actually used those words, liability issues, while talking about why she watched a teenager suffocate." Ethan handed back the essay. "What did your teacher think?" "She gave me an A and asked if she could submit it to the school literary magazine. I said yes. I want people to know what happened. Not the sanitized version where everything worked out fine, but the real version where I almost died because 200 people chose policy over compassion." "Maya, I'm not trying to make you feel bad. Or even them, really. I mean, I'm still angry at everyone who didn't help. But I'm starting to understand that the problem isn't individual cowardice. It's systemic." She leaned forward. "That's why what you're doing matters. You're not just teaching people skills, you're trying to change the system that taught them not to care." "I don't know if I'm succeeding." "You are. My dad showed me the board reports, 400 people trained, 0 incidents, companies specifically requesting your program." Maya smiled, small but genuine. "You're proving that people will help if you give them the tools and permission to do it. That's huge." Ethan thought about Voss's words in the boardroom. One incident, which was resolved successfully by emergency medical personnel. "Your dad never gave up on this," Ethan said, "even when the board wanted to shut it down. Because you saved me, and he knows that shouldn't be exceptional. It should be normal." Maya stood up. "I should go. My dad's probably done with his meeting. I just wanted you to know that what you're doing matters, even if it doesn't always feel like it." She left, and Ethan sat in his office thinking about systems and choices and the difference between policy and compassion. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "This is Daniel Voss, my office, now." Ethan walked upstairs expecting another budget cut or timeline change. Instead, he found Voss standing by his window again, but this time he looked less like a movie villain and more like someone who was very tired. "Close the door," Voss said. Ethan did. "I spoke with Richard Sinclair an hour ago. He's proposing to the board that we make your position permanent and expand the emergency response program company-wide. Full funding, dedicated staff, integration into new employee onboarding." Ethan waited for the other shoe to drop. "I told him I'd support it," Voss said. "You're supporting it." "Yes." Voss turned around. "I want to be clear. I still think you're idealistic and your approach is unnecessarily confrontational. But the data doesn't lie. Response times have improved. Staff confidence in emergency situations has increased. We've had 3 actual medical incidents in the past month, and in all 3 cases, trained personnel intervened immediately and effectively. No lawsuits, no liability issues, just people helping people. So what changed your mind? Voss was quiet for a moment. "My daughter had a car accident 2 weeks ago. Minor, fender bender, she's fine. But she hit her head on the steering wheel hard enough to get disoriented, and while she was sitting there trying to figure out what happened, 6 people walked past her car without stopping. Just kept walking like there wasn't a 19-year-old girl bleeding from a head wound 20 feet away." Ethan didn't say anything. A college student finally stopped. Kid couldn't have been more than 20. He called 911, stayed with her until the ambulance arrived, held her hand while she cried because she was scared and in shock. Didn't leave until I got to the hospital. Voss's jaw tightened. I thanked him, asked him why he'd stopped when everyone else walked by. You know what he said? What? He said his employer had just started mandatory emergency response training, said it was annoying at the time, felt like a waste of a day. But when he saw my daughter, the training kicked in and he knew what to do. So he did it. Voss pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it to Ethan. It was from a tech startup on the 14th floor. One of the tenant companies that had requested the training program. That kid works in your building, Voss said. He's one of the 400 people you've trained. And because you trained him, my daughter is okay. Ethan looked at the card, then at Voss. I'm not going to apologize for fighting you on this, Voss continued. I believed I was protecting the company from unnecessary risk. I still believe liability management is important, but you've proven that teaching people to care isn't a liability. It's an asset. So yes, I'm supporting the proposal. And yes, I'll stop trying to sabotage your program. You've earned that much. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was close enough. Thank you, Ethan said. Voss nodded. Don't make me regret it. Ethan left the office and took the elevator back down to the 10th floor. He sat at his desk and looked at the business card. Some tech startup called InnovateSphere, probably full of 20-somethings who thought they were changing the world with apps and venture capital. But one of them had stopped for Voss's daughter when everyone else walked by. Had helped because he'd been trained to help, had proved that the system could change if you gave people the tools and permission to be better. Ethan's phone buzzed, a text from Lucas. Mrs. Chen says you're picking me up today? For real? Ethan smiled and typed back. For real. We can get ice cream after. Double scoop? Don't push it. Worth a try. Ethan packed up his laptop and headed out, leaving work at 5 p.m. for the 3rd day in a row. On the way down, the elevator stopped on the 7th floor, and 3 people got on, staff from the medical clinic, still in their scrubs. One of them recognized him. You're Cole, right? The emergency response guy? Yeah. Just wanted to say thanks. We've been getting way fewer panicked calls from staff about basic medical situations now that people have some training. Makes our jobs a lot easier when everyone isn't completely helpless. The elevator reached the ground floor. Ethan stepped out into the lobby, the same marble floor where Maya had collapsed 5 weeks ago, the same space that had been full of frozen faces and phones held up to record instead of help. It looked the same, but something fundamental had changed. Not the building, the people in it. Ethan walked toward the exit, past the first aid station that was now mounted at chest height instead of 8 feet up, past the security desk where Hayes gave him a nod, out into the city that was just starting to think about rush hour. He picked up Lucas, got him double scoops despite the protest, and drove home through traffic while his son told him about the science project and the frog, and how Tyler had finally admitted that girls could be scientists after all. "Dad?" Lucas said as they pulled into the apartment parking lot. "Yeah? Are you going to keep the job? The office one?" Ethan thought about the board proposal. Permanent position, full funding, company-wide program. The chance to actually build something that lasted instead of just putting out fires. "I think so," he said, "if they'll have me." "Cool." Lucas unbuckled his seatbelt. "Does that mean we can keep getting ice cream on Thursdays?" "Don't push your luck." Lucas grinned and jumped out of the truck, already running toward the building. Ethan followed more slowly, watching his son and thinking about the choices that had led them here. The girl on the floor, the inhaler in his hand, the decision to act instead of freeze. It hadn't been heroic, it had just been human. And maybe that was the whole point, that being human meant caring about each other enough to try, even when it was uncomfortable or risky or against the rules. The system didn't change easily, but it could change. One person at a time, one choice at a time, until helping became the default instead of the exception. Ethan unlocked the apartment and followed Lucas inside, ready for whatever came next. 3 months later, Ethan stood in front of the full board again, but this time the room felt different. Margaret Chen was still at the head of the table. Voss still sat at the far end, but the atmosphere had shifted from skeptical to cautiously interested. Even the 3 board members who'd voted against him were leaning forward instead of crossing their arms. 847 people trained across all tenant companies, Ethan said, clicking through his presentation. 15 actual emergency interventions in the past 90 days. 13 successful, 2 required paramedic support, but initial intervention stabilized the patient until professionals arrived. 0 liability incidents, 0 lawsuits, and response times have improved by an average of 72% compared to incidents from the previous year. He clicked to the next slide. Testimonials from people who'd been helped. A man who'd had a stroke in the parking garage and received immediate care from a trained facilities worker. A woman who'd gone into anaphylactic shock in the cafeteria and been saved by an administrative assistant with an EpiPen. A security guard who'd recognized the signs of a heart attack in a visitor and started CPR before the paramedics arrived. "The program works," Ethan said, "not because we're turning people into medical professionals, but because we're giving them permission to care and the tools to act on it. That's all it takes, permission and tools." Margaret looked at the other board members, then back at Ethan. "What about scalability? If we make this permanent and expand it beyond this building, what does that look like?" Ethan had been preparing for this question for weeks. "We create a train-the-trainer program. Certify internal staff to deliver the curriculum so we're not dependent on external consultants. We develop an online component for the theoretical knowledge so the in-person sessions can focus purely on hands-on practice. And we partner with local EMT training programs to create a pipeline of instructors who can scale with demand." Cost projection? $200,000 annually for a citywide program covering all Voss Meridian properties. That includes training materials, instructor salaries, and ongoing certification renewal. For context, our liability insurance premiums dropped by $40,000 this quarter because of improved safety metrics. The program essentially pays for itself while reducing risk. One of the investors who'd voted against him, a woman named Patricia Holland, raised her hand. "Mr. Cole, I'll be honest. I voted no 3 months ago because I thought this was feel-good activism disguised as corporate policy. I expected it to fail or create the exact liability problems Mr. Voss warned about. I was wrong. The data is compelling and the results speak for themselves. You have my support for permanent implementation." Ethan nodded, trying not to show his surprise. Richard Sinclair spoke from his end of the table. "I'd like to propose an amendment to the permanent program. In addition to emergency response training, I want to add a cultural component, workshops on bystander psychology, the freeze response, ethical decision-making under pressure. The technical skills matter, but the mindset shift matters more. We need people to understand why they freeze and how to overcome it." "That's outside my expertise," Ethan said. "Then we hire someone whose expertise it is. A psychologist or behavioral scientist who can design that curriculum. You'd oversee the program, but you don't have to build every piece of it yourself." Sinclair looked at Margaret. "This isn't just about liability reduction or safety metrics. It's about creating a culture where people actually give a damn about each other. That has value beyond what we can measure in quarterly reports. The vote was unanimous. Permanent program, expanded scope, full funding. Ethan was officially the Director of Emergency Response and Safety Culture for Voss Meridian, with a team of 3 staff members and a budget that made his head spin. After the meeting, Voss caught him in the hallway. "You proved me wrong," Voss said. "That doesn't happen often." "I had help. You also had opposition. You pushed through it anyway." Voss extended his hand. "I won't pretend we're friends, Cole, but I respect what you've built here. Keep doing it." They shook hands, and Ethan realized that was probably the closest thing to an apology he'd ever get from Daniel Voss. That evening, Ethan left work at exactly 5 p.m. and drove to Lucas's school for the parent-teacher conference he'd almost forgotten about. Mrs. Martinez, Lucas's 3rd-grade teacher, was a woman in her 50s with the kind of patient smile that suggested she'd seen every type of parent and student, and nothing surprised her anymore. "Lucas is doing well," she said, pulling out a folder of his work. "His reading comprehension has improved significantly this year, and his math scores are above grade level. He's social, well-liked, participates in class discussions." Ethan relaxed slightly. "That's good to hear. There's one thing I wanted to mention." Mrs. Martinez pulled out a piece of paper, a creative writing assignment, Lucas's handwriting sprawling across the page. "We did an exercise where students wrote about someone they admire. Lucas wrote about you." Ethan took the paper and read, "My dad is the bravest person I know. Not because he fights bad guys or anything like that, but because he helps people even when it's hard. He saved a girl who was dying, and everyone told him he did it wrong, but he kept doing it anyway because he knew it was right. Sometimes he works too much and forgets to sign my permission slips. But he always says sorry and tries to do better. I want to be like that when I grow up. Someone who helps people even when it's scary." Ethan's throat tightened. "He talks about you a lot," Mrs. Martinez said gently. "About the choices you make and why you make them. I thought you should know that he's paying attention." "Thanks," Ethan managed. He picked up Lucas from the after-school program, and they went to the diner they liked, the one with the torn vinyl booths and the waitress who always remembered that Lucas wanted his burger with extra pickles. While they waited for their food, Lucas pulled out a permission slip. "Field trip next month," he said. "Science Museum. Can you sign it now so you don't forget?" Ethan signed it immediately and handed it back. "What's the exhibit?" "Something about the human body, how hearts work and stuff." Lucas folded the permission slip carefully and put it in his backpack. "Tyler says his dad might be a chaperone. Are you going to be one?" "You want me to?" Lucas shrugged, trying to look casual. "I mean, if you want to, no pressure." Ethan smiled. "I'll sign up." "Cool." Their food arrived and they ate in comfortable silence for a while. Then Lucas looked up from his burger. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "When you saved that girl in your building, were you scared?" Ethan thought about Maya on the marble floor, the circle of frozen faces, the moment when he'd had to decide whether to act or wait for someone else. "Yeah, I was terrified." "But you did it anyway." "Because being scared isn't a good enough reason not to help someone who needs it." Lucas considered this. "What if you'd done it wrong? What if you'd made her worse?" "Then I would have made her worse while trying to help instead of making her worse by doing nothing. At least one of those options meant I cared enough to try." "That makes sense?" Lucas took another bite of his burger. "I told Tyler that. He said his dad says you can get in trouble for helping people without permission. Tyler's dad isn't completely wrong. Sometimes you can get in trouble. But that's a problem with the system, not with helping." "So you're fixing the system?" "I'm trying to." Lucas nodded, satisfied with that answer, and went back to his food. Ethan watched his son and thought about the person Lucas was becoming, thoughtful, empathetic, willing to ask hard questions. Emma would have been proud. The next few months passed in a blur of program expansion and staff hiring. Ethan brought on Jennifer Park full-time as lead instructor, hired a behavioral psychologist named Dr. Sarah Kim to develop the cultural curriculum Sinclair had requested, and recruited Franklin Hayes as the head of field operations. Together they built something that looked less like a corporate training program and more like a movement. They trained over 2,000 people across 6 Voss Meridian properties. ran scenario drills in lobbies and parking garages and cafeterias, turning everyday spaces into training grounds, created a certification program that people actually wanted instead of resented. And slowly, building by building, they changed the culture from one of fearful inaction to confident intervention. The stories started coming in. A janitor who'd recognized a diabetic emergency and administered glucose, an accountant who'd performed CPR on a colleague until paramedics arrived, a delivery driver who'd used his training to help someone choking in a restaurant across the street from one of their buildings. Each story felt like validation, proof that the program worked, that people would help if given the tools and permission. But Ethan knew better than to think it was perfect. There were still failures, moments when people froze despite the training, situations that escalated because someone hesitated or made the wrong choice. On a Tuesday in November, Ethan got a call from security at the downtown property. There'd been an incident. A man had collapsed in the lobby during morning rush hour. 3 people had responded immediately, started CPR, called 911. The paramedics had arrived within 4 minutes and taken over. The man had died anyway. Heart attack, massive and sudden. Nothing anyone could have done differently. Ethan drove to the property and found the 3 people who'd responded sitting in the security office, shell-shocked and silent. 2 were trained staff. The 3rd was a visitor who'd taken the training at her own company after hearing about the program. "We did everything right," one of them said, a facilities manager named Robert Chen. Chest compressions, proper depth and tempo, called for the AED, used it correctly, but he didn't make it. "I know," Ethan said. "So what was the point? If we did everything right and he still died, what's the point of any of this?" Ethan sat down across from him. "The point is that he didn't die alone while people stood around filming it on their phones. He died while 3 people who cared about him fought like hell to keep him alive. That matters." "Does it? He's still dead." "Yeah, he is, and that's awful and unfair, and there's nothing anyone could have done to change it. But his family is going to know that when he collapsed, people immediately tried to help, that he mattered enough to strangers that they dropped everything to save him. Can you imagine how much worse it would be for them if he died while everyone just watched?" Robert was quiet for a long moment. "I keep seeing his face, the way he looked when we realized it wasn't working. That's going to stay with you for a while, maybe forever. That's the cost of caring. You carry the losses along with the wins. But the alternative is walking past people who need help and carrying the weight of wondering if you could have made a difference. That weight is worse. Trust me." The 3 of them sat there together, processing the trauma of trying and failing. Ethan stayed with them for an hour, then called Dr. Kim to set up a debriefing session. She arrived within 30 minutes and took over, walking them through the psychological aftermath of unsuccessful intervention. On the drive back to his building, Ethan thought about Emma, how he'd been with her at the end, holding her hand while the cancer took her piece by piece, how nothing he'd done had stopped it, but at least she hadn't been alone. At least she'd known he cared enough to stay. Maybe that was all anyone could really do. Show up, try, care enough to act even when the outcome was uncertain. That weekend, Ethan took Lucas to the Science Museum field trip, as promised. Tyler's dad was there too, along with a dozen other parents, and they spent 3 hours walking through exhibits about the human body and how it worked and all the ways it could fail. In the heart health section, Lucas stopped in front of a display showing CPR technique. He watched the demonstration video, then looked at Ethan. "That's what you taught people, right?" "Part of it, yeah." "Does it always work?" Ethan thought about Robert Chen and the man who died despite everything they'd done right. "No, sometimes people die anyway, but it works enough that it's worth trying." "What if you're too scared to try?" "Then you try anyway. Being scared doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It means you understand what's at stake." Lucas nodded and moved on to the next exhibit, but Ethan could see him processing the conversation, filing it away for later. Tyler's dad approached as the group was leaving. "Can I talk to you for a second?" They stepped away from the crowd. Tyler's dad, his name was Mark something, worked in accounting, looked uncomfortable. "I owe you an apology," Mark said. "I was one of the people who complained about the training when it was first announced. Said it was a waste of time, complained to my wife that you were just a guy on a power trip. Then last month, my mom had a stroke while visiting us. She collapsed in our kitchen, and I knew exactly what to do because of your program. Called 911, positioned her correctly, monitored her breathing, kept her calm until the ambulance arrived. The paramedics said those first few minutes made a huge difference in her recovery. Ethan didn't know what to say. She's okay now, Mark continued, in rehab, learning to walk again, but the doctors say she'll make a full recovery, and that's because you taught me to act instead of panic. So yeah, I'm sorry I fought you on it, and thank you. He walked back to join Tyler before Ethan could respond. On the bus ride back to school, Lucas sat next to Ethan instead of with the other kids. Tyler's dad said you saved his grandma, Lucas said quietly. I didn't save her, I just taught him what to do. That's the same thing though, isn't it? Like, if you teach someone how to help, and then they help someone, you kind of help too. Like help math, Ethan smiled. Help math? Yeah, you know, one person helps another person who helps another person. It adds up. That's actually a pretty good way to think about it. Lucas leaned against him, content, and Ethan put his arm around his son's shoulders. They rode the rest of the way like that, and Ethan thought about help math and how many people had to be willing to add to the equation before it made a real difference. In January, 6 months after the board had approved the permanent program, Margaret Chen called Ethan to her office. It was on the 21st floor corner suite with views that probably cost extra. She was sitting behind her desk when he arrived, reading something on her tablet. Mr. Cole, thank you for coming. I have a proposition for you. Ethan sat down. Okay. The board has been approached by 3 other commercial real estate companies asking about licensing your program. They've seen our results, the safety metrics, the liability reduction, the cultural shift, and they want to implement something similar in their own properties. We could license the curriculum and training methodology for a significant fee. 10% of that fee would be structured into your compensation package. Ethan tried to do the math and gave up. How significant? Conservatively, each licensing agreement would be worth between $300,000 and $500,000. We're looking at potentially a dozen companies interested in the first year alone. Your compensation increase would be substantial. It was more money than Ethan had ever thought about making. Enough to move out of the apartment, buy an actual house, with a yard where Lucas could play. Enough to stop worrying about whether he could afford to fix the truck when it finally died. Enough to create the kind of stability he'd been chasing since Emma got sick. What's the catch? Ethan asked. Margaret smiled slightly. No catch. Just recognition that you've built something valuable and the board wants to capitalize on it while compensating you fairly. You'd still run the program here, but you'd also oversee licensing implementation and quality control across partner companies. It's a significant expansion of responsibility. Can I think about it? Of course. Take a week. Talk it over with your family. That night, Ethan made spaghetti, Lucas's favorite, and they ate at the kitchen table while Ethan explained the offer in terms an 8-year-old could understand. So basically, they want to pay you a bunch of money to teach other buildings how to help people, Lucas summarized. Pretty much. And you're not sure if you want to do it. I'm not sure if I want the job to get bigger. I just got it to a place where I can leave at 5 and actually see you. Lucas twirled spaghetti on his fork, thinking. Mom would have wanted you to say yes. The statement caught Ethan off guard. They didn't talk about Emma much anymore. Not because they'd forgotten her, but because the grief had become something they carried quietly instead of actively. Why do you think that? Ethan asked. Because she always said you were the kind of person who helped everyone except yourself. And this is someone trying to help you while you help other people. That's like double help. Or help squared. Math again. Ethan laughed, rough and surprised. Help squared. Yeah. So you should probably say yes. Plus, if we get more money, maybe we can get a dog. We're not getting a dog. Worth a try. Ethan accepted the offer. Over the next 6 months, his team grew to 12 people. Instructors, coordinators, quality control specialists. They licensed the program to 8 companies, trained over 10,000 people across the city. The compensation increase Margaret had promised was real, substantial enough that Ethan moved them to a 2-bedroom house in a neighborhood with good schools and a backyard that was too small for a dog, but perfect for everything else. Lucas thrived. His grades improved. He made new friends. He joined a soccer team that practiced twice a week and played games on Saturdays that Ethan never missed. And slowly, in the small moments between work and parenthood, Ethan realized he was building the kind of life Emma had wanted for them before she got sick. stable, present, meaningful. On a Thursday in June, exactly 1 year after Maya Sinclair had collapsed in the lobby, Ethan got a call from Richard Sinclair's office requesting a meeting. He showed up expecting another expansion proposal or licensing opportunity. Instead, he found Maya sitting in her father's office wearing a graduation gown. "Surprise," she said. Ethan looked at Sinclair. "I'm confused." "Maya graduated high school today," Sinclair explained. "Top of her class, full scholarship to college. She wanted you to be here when we told you." Maya stood up, handed Ethan an envelope. "Open it." Inside was a copy of her valedictorian speech. Ethan skimmed it, eloquent, thoughtful, full of the kind of wisdom that came from almost dying at 16. The last paragraph made him stop. "A year ago, I learned that heroism isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and acting anyway because someone needs help more than you need to feel safe. The man who saved my life wasn't a doctor or a paramedic. He was an electrician with grease on his hands who saw a person instead of a problem. He taught the city that caring isn't complicated. You just have to give a damn enough to try. And that's the only lesson that really matters." "You quoted me," Ethan said. "I quoted the truth. And I wanted you to know that what happened in that lobby didn't just change my life. It changed how I see the world. I'm going to college to study public health because of you, because I want to build systems that empower people to help instead of punishing them for trying." Ethan looked at this girl. Not a girl anymore, really, but a young woman who'd survived something traumatic and turned it into purpose, and felt something shift in his chest. "I'm proud of you," he said. "I'm proud of you too." Maya hugged him, quick and fierce. "Thank you for not letting me die alone in a room full of strangers." After she left, Sinclair walked Ethan to the elevator. "She's going to do remarkable things," Sinclair said, "because you gave her the chance to. That matters more than safety metrics or licensing fees or any of the other ways we measure success. I just did what anyone should have done. But you were the only one who did it. That's the difference between should and is." Sinclair extended his hand. "Thank you, Cole, for everything." They shook hands, and Ethan took the elevator down to the lobby. The same marble floor where this had all started, the same space that had been full of frozen faces and fear. It looked different now. People moved through it with a different energy, more aware, more connected. The first aid station was at chest height. The security staff wore badges that said Emergency Response Certified. The culture had changed in ways that were visible and invisible, small shifts that added up to something significant. Ethan walked outside into the summer heat and called Lucas. "Hey, buddy, you want to get ice cream after camp?" "Always." "Can we go to the place with the weird flavors?" "Sure." "Cool, love you, Dad." "Love you too." Ethan hung up and stood on the sidewalk watching people pass by. Delivery drivers and executives and maintenance workers and everyone in between. Strangers who might someday save each other's lives because someone had taught them it was okay to care. He thought about Emma and how she'd made him promise to keep being the kind of person who helped. About Maya and the choice he'd made in a split second that had changed everything. About Lucas growing up in a world where maybe, just maybe, people would run toward each other instead of away. The system hadn't been broken because people were cruel. It had been broken because people were scared of liability, of making mistakes, of being the one who got it wrong. And all it had taken to fix it was permission. Permission to care, permission to try, permission to be human in a world that sometimes forgot what that meant. Ethan got in his truck and drove toward the ice cream place, the one with the weird flavors Lucas loved. Traffic was heavy, the city moving at its usual chaotic pace. Somewhere in it, someone was probably having an emergency. And somewhere in it, someone trained by Ethan's program would probably stop to help. Not because they were heroes, not because they were fearless, but because they understood that the opposite of freezing wasn't courage. It was just giving enough of a damn to try. And that, Ethan had learned, was all it really took. Permission and tools, caring and action. One person helping another until help math added up to something that looked like a better world. He pulled into the parking lot and texted Lucas that he was waiting. While he sat there, his phone buzzed with an email from Dr. Kim. Subject line: Next steps. She'd attached a proposal for expanding the program beyond emergency response into general workplace culture, teaching people to notice when colleagues were struggling, to check in instead of assuming someone else would, to build connections that made helping instinctive instead of exceptional. Ethan opened the attachment and started reading. The program would be huge, complicated, probably impossible to implement perfectly. But perfect wasn't the point. Trying was the point. Caring enough to build systems that served people instead of protecting institutions. Lucas came running out of the building, backpack bouncing, face lit up with whatever story he was about to tell about his day. Ethan put away his phone and got out of the truck to meet his son, ready for ice cream and soccer practice, and the 1,000 small moments that made up a life worth living. He'd saved Maya Sinclair because it was the right thing to do. But she'd saved him too, in a way. Gave him purpose, direction, proof that one choice could matter, that freezing wasn't inevitable, that people could change if you gave them a reason and the tools to do it. They got ice cream. Lucas ordered something called Unicorn Dreams that was bright purple and probably 90% sugar, and sat at the outdoor tables watching the world go by. A man tripped on the sidewalk and fell hard, groceries scattering. 3 people immediately stopped to help him up, check if he was hurt, gather his things. None of them wore badges or uniforms. They were just people who saw someone who needed help and decided that mattered more than getting wherever they were going 5 minutes faster. Lucas noticed it too. See? Help math. Yeah, Ethan said. Help math. And maybe that was the only equation that really mattered. Add enough people willing to try, willing to care, willing to act instead of freeze, and eventually the sum became something bigger than any individual action. Became a culture, a movement, a world where people ran toward each other instead of away. Ethan had spent a year building that world one training session at a time. He'd keep building it for as long as they'd let him. Not because he was special or heroic or particularly qualified, but because he'd learned what Emma had tried to teach him all along, that the measure of a life wasn't what you accomplished for yourself, but what you made possible for others. He'd made it possible for 2,000 people to save lives, and they'd make it possible for 2,000 more. The math would keep adding up, one person at a time, until the world looked a little more like the place Emma had believed it could be. Lucas finished his ice cream and announced he was ready for soccer practice. They got back in the truck and drove through the city Ethan had spent a year trying to make better, knowing the work was never finished, but also knowing it mattered. Because in the end, that was the only real choice. Try or don't try. Care or don't care. Run toward people who need help or walk away assuming someone else will handle it. Ethan had run toward Maya Sinclair when everyone else froze. And in doing so, he'd learned that heroism wasn't about being fearless or perfect or even particularly brave. It was just about being present enough to notice when someone needed help and caring enough to provide it. Everything else was just details. The only thing that really mattered was showing up, being human, giving a damn, and teaching other people to do the same,